Good afternoon, everyone. Stay seated. Before we start, I'd just open the meeting, welcome everybody here, and ask Danielle Misligard to read out the terms of reference for the conducting of this meeting.
This meeting is recorded and live streamed for public viewing via the internet in accordance with Council's Code of Meeting Practice, with the recording stored and made available to the public for viewing later. The recording is subject to copyright. Members of the public attending or speaking at this meeting will be recorded and publicly broadcast. By attending this meeting, you are voluntarily consenting to your participation being recorded. Any part of the meeting that is held in closed session will not be live streamed. Council requests that everyone present is respectful and uses appropriate language. Council does not accept liability for any defamatory, discriminatory or offensive comments that are made during the course of the meeting. Please ensure that all electronic devices, including mobile phones, are switched to silent. Under the Code of Meeting Practice, public recording of the meeting is prohibited without prior authorisation by Council. Council's live streaming of meetings via Facebook is designed to encourage constructive dialogue. We remind users to be digitally responsible and respect their fellow posters. We ask users to keep comments relevant and not spam or post personal or commercially sensitive information. This includes content that may be defamatory, offensive or discriminatory towards council employees, councillors or other persons or organisations. Failure to follow Facebook House rules will result in comments being deleted, and if this behaviour persists, the user will be blocked.
Thank you. Can I ask you all to be upstanding now for the opening? And can everybody please turn off their mobile phones and any recording devices onto silent, please. Acknowledgement of country, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders both past and present. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders that may be present here today.
Thank you, and welcome Jeremy Tonks from Exeter Anglican Church. Would you open with prayer, please?
And Bundanoon and Tallum. Greetings from the southern end of the Shire. As a proud member of the Bundanoon Community Association and the Wingecarribee Tigers Cricket Club, bring greetings. And I just wanted to report how resilient those communities are. You hear more of the gripes than we do, but I'm just delighted the way folk are looking after each other out our end of the bush. But let me pray. Father, we thank you for 16 inches of rain. We thank you for the amazing efforts of our fireys over recent months. We thank you for our communities. And I pray that you will help us all to be good, observant and caring neighbours. Father, I pray for this august body this afternoon. As they meet, as they make important decisions, I pray that people will have the ability to speak clearly and present their cases well. I pray for wise minds to consider various issues. And Father, my prayer is that wise decisions will be made that are for the betterment of the whole Shire. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Tonks, and all the very best for your cricket team this year. Okay, do we have any apologies? No, we don't. Adoption of previous minutes held on the 26th of February 2020. Somebody move that way.
I've got
Councillor McLaughlin and seconded Councillor Markwart in relation to the correctness. Councillor
Yes.
Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just bear with me. On page 27, Mr Mayor, I was asking a question as to whether the roof sag in the playhouse that was reported to Council by being noticed by the staff in December 2018, I was asking a question at the time this meeting was terminated, and so therefore I'd like that to be in the minutes, that I asked that question.
No, the question...
Why? We'd been told.
Because Councillor Scandrett, questions from councillors are not placed in the body of a
we never got to
minutes.
a vote on that, Mr Mayor, so I would have
Thank
put up
you.
an amendment.
No, Councillor Scandrick,
Well-
we are
Well, we're going to be
asking
debating
on
it later
the
today.
correctness of the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Not any notices of motion. On that, I put the recommendation. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. We now move on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? Councillor Turlton.
Yeah, 13.4 legal matters, 19.3 legal reporting closed council. I have, it's a pecuniary interest, I have a legal matter with council at the moment. I'll leave the chamber if it's
you.
debated in closed.
Any other declarations of interest? Councillor Turlton, do you like? Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 9.2, development application, dual occupancy, detached subsequent subdivision to create 2 lots at St James Fairfax Circuit. I'm declaring a less than significant conflict of interest, if you could say it is, but I do, in East Barrel, do have a property that's on a corner block that has a granny flat that could be subdivided. So I will stay in the chamber and vote on it. I think it's less than significant. It's not in the same precinct or the same development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mark Ward, yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 9.1, change of use, studio secondary dwelling. My declaration is non-pecuniary and non-significant. I've worked with the applicant for a couple of years on a community issue and we know each other quite well, but we don't have any strong relationship currently. Thank you. I will stay in the chamber and vote. According.
Thank you. Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 9.1, change of use, studio and secondary dwelling. I'm declaring a non-pecuniary significant interest. The applicant is a committee member on the workplace, the place where I work, and as such I'll be leaving the chamber and not to remove any perception of conflict.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. There is no mayoral minute. So we move on to public forum, application for transfer of unmade Crown Road to Council Part Surrey Street, Berrima, and Mrs Christine Mallet will address Council against the recommendation.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. Where you go.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you very much for being given the opportunity to come and speak here this afternoon. We're interested, my husband and I are interested in purchasing the unmade road, which is part Surrey Street that goes down to the riverfront, and there's a small package of land at the bottom of the road that goes onto the river. And we bought our house in 2014, and when the estate agent showed us the property, he indicated that our neighbours on either side had both bought their land and that we should be able to apply to buy it. So we've had lots of correspondence back and forth over the years, and then in 2019 we were finally, it looked like it was going to go ahead, so we negotiated with our neighbours and came to an agreement, and then at the last minute we were told that there were other people that were interested in it and that they were going to pass it over to the council. So our initial reaction was that we wouldn't we wouldn't try and pursue it. But then when we came to the meeting the other day and we'd had time to think about it, I thought that actually I feel it's worth us having a go, because we feel that the land isn't really of any use to anybody because of the way it's a 5 metre stretch of Surrey Street that's covered in big trees and bushes, and so it's very inaccessible. When it goes down to the river, when it comes down to the river, the land is full of wombat holes and it slopes quite steeply down towards the edge of the river, and then it drops very suddenly. At the moment the water is a bit deeper because of the floods, but when the water's about 3 or 4 feet lower, it's about 2 metres down to the water, and it's very steep with rocks and things, so nobody ever goes across to that side of the river. You can see on the photo there that there's big rocks in the centre. So what we're interested in is buying Surrey Street, the 5 metre part of it, and the piece of land, the small piece of land that's at the bottom that comes to the edge of that rock that's like a tear-shaped rock on the side, because there's a barrier from there over to the other side, because that whole section is full of enormous rocks, so there's no way that we can go over to the other side. Now, on the other side of the photo, is it possible to go back to the one that shows yes, that one there, the one before this one, that one. You see there's those enormous rocks in the middle, so that you can't go from one side to the other. So we would like to purchase the land to where that teardrop rock is. And on the other side, which is still theoretically part of that Surrey Street package, there's a big tree. You can see the big tree, and there's a rope that hangs down, and on the north side of the river, which is where the camping ground is, that's where people swim in the river, and they come in their thousands over the summer. And what the smarter young ones like to do is to swim across the river, climb up those rocks on the right-hand side. You've done it? And then they swing from the rope into the river. And I think that's still part of the Surrey Street package. So it would mean that if we were able to have the side that's really of no value to anyone, that even if they climb up there, it's a small piece of land, there's nowhere where they can go, it's very rough, it's full of wombat holes. I think there's probably tunnels underneath. So I think it's actually not a very suitable place for people to go. It could represent a health and safety issue. So the other side of the street, the other end means that they could still continue to enjoy that part of the river, and our owning that little piece of land isn't going to really affect anybody. So that's really our main case, that hopefully you could release some of it for us. The other thing with the road is that it's... Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and just for the gallery's information, being public forum, there are no questions from councillors, only in relation to visitor items.
I brought this up before. This really should have been, it's in the business paper, it should have been a visitor item, not a public forum.
Then, sorry, Councillor Turland, it is, I can only go off the run sheet.
I understand that, but
Thank
I
you.
think when staff are telling the people who want to speak, they should realise that if they go to the visitor item, we can ask questions.
Okay, I take your point, except sometimes there is the visitor items can be taken up. The next one on public forum is 12.4. Mr. Chris White will address council against the recommendation. Thank you. Haven't seen you. You know the drill. Yes.
So good afternoon, and thank you, Mayor Gare. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Turland, councillors, General Manager Prendergast, and all staff and residents in attendance. My name is Chris White. I'm actually a director at Liverpool Council and was a former staff member at this council. Born and raised in the Wingecarribee and have lived most of my life here. Proud Wingecarribee resident. I hold a Master of Planning from the University of Technology in Sydney. I'm also a former senior lawyer at this council and have 15 years experience as a lawyer doing planning, local government and land and environment work. I'm a resident of Colarvale. My parents have lived there for nearly 20 years. My mother is the president of the Colarvale Village Association. My father's the treasurer. And the town of Colarvale and its residents are very dear to me, and there's many of us here in the audience today with an interest in this item. I'm here to talk about the local housing strategy, item 12.4 on the agenda. Obviously, this is a necessary thing. The Wingecarribee needs a local housing strategy, and it's important that we get this right to ensure meaningful and sustainable growth in housing stock for our area. Look, the staff report is solid, with one exception that I'll talk about in a moment. I think it's a little reactive to the department as well, but that's fair enough. But the Wensleydale, inclusion of Wensleydale as an item in relation to the future housing stock, it's not a suitable site. I don't believe it's a suitable site to be identified in that new residential living area stock that's been identified in the proposed strategy. Why is this? Under the local housing strategy's own criteria, now, it is too far from an established town boundary. Mittagong is many kilometres away. I know it takes me nearly 10 minutes to drive to Mittagong from Colarvale. It's just too far. It is also too far from rail or transport nodes. Now, this is where I do have an issue with the report itself. The report itself identifies that it's close to a passenger rail line. The residents of Colarvale will tell you that that rail line is the decommissioned old Heritage Loop line. No trains have been along there for years, and much to our chagrin, not even the Heritage trains can travel that line. It's not in commission. It is not a meaningful transport node and shouldn't be considered as part of the strategy. As a result, anyone coming into and out of Wensleydale will do so in a car. And that potentially looks to turn Wensleydale into the next Wilton, which is not what we want in the Highlands. It will erode the green between, which is a feature of Highlands living and has been since the establishment of Bong Bong and the first surveys of the area. Obviously, the bushfire threat, it's front of mind for many of us at the moment, and had Wensleydale been established as a residential area at that time, it would have been under severe threat of fire, and will be if it is established as a residential site in the future. I would also respectfully submit that it's inconsistent with the proposed local strategic planning statement that's also on the agenda for today's meeting. There are at least 6 items identified there which I would respectfully suggest that Wensleydale is inconsistent with, in particular around biodiversity corridors, the protection of agricultural lands, the protection of the Shire's heritage assets, Wensleydale itself being quite a significant heritage asset. The need to grow and diversify the agricultural base, in particular in areas close to the Sydney Basin, and it doesn't get much closer in terms of Wingecarribee than Wensleydale. And the unique character of the Shire's village layout. Obviously, this would erode the northern villages and their way of life, the unique character that they have. In addition to that, I would suggest to you that on the whole, the impact on the heritage item, the northern villages in particular, is just not consistent, and we'd be respectfully asking the council to consider removing Wensleydale as an item in the future residential areas. In summary, we do not want Wilton in the Southern Highlands, and that's what Wensleydale suggests. It is a residential site on the highway, yes, potentially, but those of you who've been and seen Wilton and what it's done to the Wallandilly, anyone who's spoken to a Wallandilly resident about the impacts of Wilton on that shire, we do not want to replicate that in the Southern Highlands. And councillors, I'd respectfully ask that you consider removing it from the local housing strategy as a result. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. White. We now move on to visitor items, and we'll deal with the 9.1, first item on the agenda.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Whipper, yes, is exiting the chambers. Change of use, studio to secondary dwelling, and Mr. Scott Lee will address council in favour of this recommendation. No, you can come up here if you wish.
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this. My name's Keith Smith. I'm a local, I've My ancestors sort of were some of the first settlers sort of in the area here. I've been away from here for quite some time, so we moved back here about 4 years ago. Now, I've got a place which I put in a DA sort of about 9 months ago. This DA is about the use of an existing building as a secondary dwelling. The building having been previously approved by council some 35 years ago. There is no suggestion that the built form has any adverse impact. The issue is a technical one, and it revolves around council's willingness to accept the variation request on the floor area of the secondary dwelling. Okay, so under the planning instrument, sort of it's 60 square metres, whereas my studio is all of 74. So we've got a massive 14 square metres of extra floor space there, which is stopping this sort of from being approved. I've submitted the necessary application for the appropriate, what's called a clause 4.6 variation. This submission has not been made available to the councillors as part of the business papers. I did email a copy of the submission to each of the councillors, however, it does not form part of the formal report. The assessment report, which makes reference to the fact that the C 4.6 request was submitted, fails to properly address the points made in the document. I believe I have satisfied your requirements to demonstrate that strict adherence to the floor area development standard is not unreasonable or unnecessary in the circumstances of the particular development application. However, I do not believe that council has fulfilled its reciprocal obligation to show why this is necessary and reasonable to enforce the development standard in this case. The report emphasises that council does not generally support variations to this development standard. This may be so, but it is not the question. Council's obligation under C 4.6 is to assess the matter with specific regard to the circumstances in the case in front of it and with respect to the arguments put forward in the variation request. Without access to the submission and no proper reference to the assessment in the assessment report to the submission, I do not believe that council should be refusing the DA tonight. A closer examination of the reasons supporting the variation would hopefully lead you to the conclusion that the DA is in fact worthy of support. Council cannot take this one-size-fits-all approach to determine clause 4.6 variation requests. Judged on the merit of the case, the variation can be supported. It is not appropriate for council to base the decision on the concerns that other applicants will suddenly use this decision to try and force a variation. In addition, there is simply no evidence to support this will happen. The distinction needs to be made between this case involving an existing building and the case where it is a new building. The building was constructed some 23 years before the so-called granny flat legislation came into existence, into effect. I'm not a planner. I was looking through council's, the DCP for Barrel, and I came across this so this is dual occupancy for secondary dwellings in an R3 medium density zone. So my property is zoned R5. So in the R3 zoning, smaller, so 1,000 square metre block, which can't be subdivided, I'm allowed to have 100 square metres granny flat. So go figure. If I was on a rural property with my modest home, I'd be able to have only 90 square metres granny flat. So it just to me there's a contradiction there. I think you've got a major discussion coming up tonight around a housing strategy. If you're looking at housing strategy, what I'm trying to do would fit quite nicely within the parameters of this housing strategy. I just want to get to the fact, maybe the reason why I put this application in. One of the community service groups that I work for, we raise money for domestic violence victims, local domestic violence services. And through the course of doing that, I sometimes encounter women who are homeless because of their domestic violence situations. So I thought, hang on a minute, I've got this fantastic studio. All I've got to do is put a kitchen in there, and then I can provide someone with a safe, secure place to live. I didn't think that I was going to get caught up in this battle for Middle Earth that I now find myself in. So yeah, at the moment there's something like there's nearly over 20 women locally that are looking for housing. So all I wanted to do was be able to provide a place, a safe place for someone to come and shelter, sort of in a safe place to live. Sort of, so that's sort of the reason sort of that's driven me sort of to put this in. I really hope sort of you give some sympathetic sort of consideration sort of to my application. I'm sure if you approve this tonight, sort of when you get up in the morning, the sun will still come up, the birds will still be in the trees, sort of, you know, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference, but it will make a difference to someone's life. So, yeah, so I just ask you to please sort of consider sort of my application sympathetically.
Thank you. We take questions on visitor items. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Smith, and yes, I think very admirable that you've brought this forward, actually. 14 square metres over. My understanding, I'm not a planner either, but my understanding is you could build a 60 square granny flat. You could put on 14 or 15 square metres of a veranda.
Yes, that's right.
And that would be acceptable.
That would be acceptable, that's right, yes.
Thank you. You've answered my question.
But that sort of entails, and this is what council has suggested to me, I actually move an external wall in sort of 3 metres sort of in order to satisfy this space, you know, which to me sort of is just, I mean, I can't afford to do that, but it's just, you've been there, you sort of, you know, you did a site visit, you know, it's a pleasant, well-built space. It's up sort of nice and high, sort of, so it's nice and secure, you know, sort of, so, yeah. I mean, I just couldn't afford sort of to do that because it means sort of structurally sort of, but it's been suggested to me sort of from a couple of areas, yeah, sort of, so that's the reason sort of why I wouldn't go down that path, sort of, because it's just structurally sort of, it's just too expensive for me.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
Back when it was built, we've got a date in here, so 20-odd years ago. Since
35 years ago, so I've actually got a copy of the original DA.
So you've actually secured a copy of the old DA?
I've got the original stamped copy of it, yeah.
And what did it say the use of the building was to be used back then?
A rumpus room.
A rumpus room?
Rumpus room. That's what it was defined as sort of under the DA.
Which is a habitable room.
Is it?
It's a habitable room.
Is it? I'm not too sure.
I'm sure you can live in rumpus rooms, can't you? You can put a bed in there.
I mean, there's a bathroom there, sort of, there's a kitchenette there, sort of, that was in the original plan, sort of, and that's what it is now. That's right, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Markwart.
Mr Mayor, question for Mr Smith through the Mayor. Mr Smith, would you make a public announcement or statement the studio would only be used for that specific purpose that you've outlined?
Sure, I'm happy with that. Yeah, as I said, sort of I work sort of with the group, sort of local groups, sort of, and as I said, that's where I got that figure from. There's over 20 women sort of that are looking for accommodation, sort of. So I'm not looking to profit from this. I just want to help someone. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett.
I actually have a slightly different question to Councillor McLaughlin. So I wouldn't ask you to say that that's the purpose.
Well, you're not.
Let me speak, but because I don't want you to reveal that you had that in use in wider things. But could I ask this: if the planning strategy goes through and so on, in a year's time, you expect that you'd be able to come back to this and get it sorted, wouldn't you?
I would, yeah, but yes. I'd really like to get on with it. Yeah,
I understand that perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you for your time.
I think we should have an introduction on this from Mr. Wilton.
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider DA 191771, which seeks development consent for the purpose of a change of use of an existing studio to a secondary dwelling at 24 Soma Avenue, Bowral. The site is zoned R5, large lot residential, and secondary dwellings are not permissible within the zone. The proposal is permissible, however, with consent by virtue of the State Environmental Planning Policy, Affordable Rental Housing 2009. The proposal seeks to convert the existing studio located on Soma Avenue to a secondary dwelling, and no building works are proposed as part of this change of use. The proposal has been reported to full council on the basis that it contains a significant policy departure, being that the applicant has requested to vary the maximum allowable floor area of 60 square metres for a secondary dwelling as specified within the affordable housing set. The proposal requests a departure of 24% of the development standard with a 74.55 square metre area proposed. Council has consistently applied the 60 square metre control for secondary dwellings within the R5 zone in accordance with clause 22.3b As such, varying this development standard would further erode the integrity of the controls for future applications submitted to Council. On this basis, Council staff recommend a refusal on this occasion.
Thank you. Questions to Mr Wilton? Councillor Turland?
I'll be moving option 2.
Okay.
When a rumpus room, can you put a bed and a mattress in a rumpus room?
Through you, Madam General Manager, Mr Wilton.
Through the Chair, a rumpus room wouldn't be a habitable. You've got to look at the actual structure itself. When you're talking about habitable, it's as a separate domicile. There's certain features that are required, including kitchens, bathrooms, laundries, which this facility doesn't have.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Mayor. That now I'm asking a question of a planner. I can say that the 14 square metres that's over this, you could have 14 square metres of veranda attached to a granny flat, and that would not count, or that would be acceptable.
Non-habitable.
Not well. It's part of the veranda. It's part of the floor space.
Through the Chair, the veranda is not part of the floor space. The calculation's taken on the internal walls of the building.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Marquardt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A question for Mr Wilton through the Chair. Mr Wilton, can you advise approximately how many development applications we've either approved or received over the last 12 months for a secondary dwelling under 60 square metres, in the sense that they presume designed the DA to meet that 60 square metre rule? Can you quantify that? Thank you.
Through the Chair, I believe there's about 14 or 15.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr Wilton, you haven't got a question. You're ready to move your recommendation?
This is not right on the screen.
So I've got a question. There was a inference that this is going to be used as a emergency accommodation for those in need. The DA goes with if it's approved, goes with the land, not the applicant, and it can't be given as a temporary use, can it?
Through the Chair, the development application goes to the land. So if the developer was to on-sell the parcel of land, the DA would then be passed on to any future owner.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Turner.
I moved option 2 on page 11, and that's to approve the development application subject to conditions attached item 2. Option 2, page 11.
Okay, so you wish, yes, it's moved by Councillor Turland, seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. You wish to speak to a Councillor Turland?
Yes, if I can. 35 years ago, somebody built a building with no restrictions on what they could, in theory, use it for. From what we're told, it was a rumpus room. And I would put to you, even though council might say you can't sleep in a rumpus room, I would think many people have been sleeping in rumpus rooms for years. So I think this is on a huge block of land. You know, as I said before, in Renwick, or even on 450 square metre lots in Natai Ponds, you can build a 60 square metre building at the back and it complies under the state rules. This guy's come here with clean hands and said this was built 35 years ago, he wants to change it. It's not on 450 square metres, it's probably on something like 4,500 square metres. It is not, it's on a dead end road. There's only one more house towards the end of a dirt road. It goes nowhere. There's no impact on anybody here. The gentleman has done the right thing. He has a clean conscience. He bought it to council instead of just using it and collecting rent from somebody if he wished to. He did the right thing. If you look at the housing strategy that we're just about to go and endorse, and you can go to page 8 on that, and it says provide a greater mix or point of housing markets to improve the affordable housing and to work with the community housing providers to increase the stock and social and community housing throughout the Shire. This is what this does, but this was built 35 years ago, not built today. I find it extraordinary that we can build a 60 square metre on a 450 square metre lot, and we're not going to allow this bloke who's come here with clean hands to build it, not to build it, just to legally trade it. If you go to another document that was provided to us here at our workshop earlier today, our briefing sessions, provided diverse, affordable housing options. It's exactly what this bloke has done. But it was built 35 years ago. Now what he could do is take 14 square metres up by moving one wall back in and turning it into a deck over an existing garage 35 years ago. Because it's technically 60 square metres? To me that doesn't make a lot of sense. I think he's done the honourable thing by coming here today, lodging the DA 9 months ago. 9 months ago for an existing building, just a change of use, that's all it is. And we're going to tie it up in knots and possibly have to go to court to get approval. I think the court would slam us and go, you guys serious? A 14 square metres, a building was built? What would be the point? 4.6 is for the variation to the SEP and to council's guidelines. Anybody can apply to it, height, bulk, scale, square metres. He's done that. We haven't got a lot on here, but I imagine there would be a reasonable argument of why 14 square metres is a change of 4.6 variation to requirements of council. It would be a shame to see the opportunity for somebody to live in this particular building, which he could have done if he didn't bring it to council. Nobody would have known. He's done the right thing. It's not setting a precedent because it's an existing building. And any new buildings have to be built in 60 square metres. That is known. And I would think there's not going to be too many of these floating around of over 60 square metres. And the reason probably was over 60 because there's a double garage with a little bit of laundry on the side of it that's made it the square metres that it is. And now if he was going to build it today, I'm sure he would have made it 60 square metres. He wouldn't have gone through the trouble and 9 months of hassle. He's done nothing wrong. He's come here in clean hands. Well done.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Turland has summed it up pretty well. I'm sure if he'd just put this in, Mr Mayor, and hadn't told us it was, no one would have gone and measured it. If he'd said 60, we would have probably just, boom. But he's told us it's 72, so it's outside. And as I mentioned earlier in my my conflict of interest, I've got a granny flat that's 90 square metres because it's over 1,000 square metres. I came to council, I got that information a long time ago, and I built that in accordance. So I think the right thing here is to approve this. And what I would say, Mr Wilton has said and suggested in this report that we are setting a precedent. I don't think we really are, Mr Mayor, because I think generally the courts would see that we've been consistent on this all the way through, and we'll continue that. But this is an exception. It's on a very large block. As Councillor Turland said, it was built 30 years ago. It's not really going to have some of the impacts a lot of these infills will have. So, and also we hear the reason for this man wanting to do this in the community, and we know what the tragedies we've seen in this state and other areas with regard to domestic violence is just disgraceful. And I think I applaud Mr Smith for pursuing this and doing the right thing when who knows how many are out there that probably haven't been checked by council, that are illegal, you know, and you know, someone in the street could put their hand up and dob them in, I suppose, but you know, there'd be many, I would imagine, that aren't approved by council that carry on. So I applaud the decision to councillors to approve this. I think this is a one-off thing. I can't convince Councillor Nelson by the looks of things. I don't think it sets such a precedent that it's going to overturn what we've got in on our statute books at the moment. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Howell said.
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. Look, over the years, over the decades, in fact, that minimum area has changed. So, for example, the fact that Councillor McLaughlin had one that was 90 and there's others might have had one greater than that or smaller. 60's the go at the moment, but to be quite frank, when we give consideration to this, we cannot look at what the proposed purpose is in terms of the details, commendable as it is from a planning point of view. But what I think should happen is that we should go along with approval, and I agree with the amendment, on the basis that, as well as the conditions that are proposed there, that a covenant be placed on it, that it be used for residential purposes, not going into any issue about what they are, but they're residential, because what we don't want to see is down the line, all of a sudden there's some sort of industrial building on there or something else. So I think that really should go on to those conditions. Otherwise, I support it. That's right, yeah.
Okay, so there will be a point 2 that the building, that the...
Yeah, word it up. Let Nick Wilton organise it. Yeah, Mark. Tell you what it is.
Okay, so the, but basically that the, it be used for residential usage only. Councillor Nelson. Oh, Councillor Markwood, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much. I'd like to first of all acknowledge and thank council staff for the report. I believe the report actually recommends what it should, which is basically that we follow our policy, our LEP, DCP, etc. So I think the council report is appropriate. However, councils have to include in their consideration wider factors and bigger issues, I suppose. I do have a couple of concerns about supporting this for reasons that council have explored, but I also very strongly support the applicant's intent here. And the fact that he's willing to make a public statement on it, I think strengthens that somewhat for me. I will listen to the rest of the debate and make my decision accordingly, but I think you know the way I'm leaning at the stage. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Markwood. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, with Councillor Turlin being a long-term builder in the Shire and Councillor Halstead being a former planner, they've got possibly some good reasons to lean the way they are. But I'm sort of a black and white guy, and I sort of look at page 12, and the report specifies a number of reasons for refusal. And the main one there is it does set a precedent within the Shire because there are a number of dwellings out there that can be converted, number of studios out there that can be converted into residential accommodation. Now, if people are out there doing that, then they take that upon themselves, because if there's an accident and someone's killed, that person who leased that out will possibly go to jail. If this ownership changes, then the use of being for the female ladies that he talked about, if the ownership of the building changes, then of the property, then the flat will change too. So as a councillor, as a layperson councillor, you have to be guided by the staff in this report. I'm seeing that if it was to be built or the application submitted today, it would be refused. So I'll be voting against this and be moving the recommendation.
Then if you're going to move the recommendation, then you do it as an amendment.
It have to be a foreshadow.
Yeah, so you would be foreshadowing a subject to the recommendation passing. Councillor, clarification?
You need to get that, what I said. Not that the building is used for residential purpose, only means nothing. That's what's in the consent. It's got to be application of restrictions to user under section A8B. Bang, I said.
Okay,
Nick can give you the exact wording, but it's got to be right.
Can, for clarification, can I ask Mr Wilton to... and for clarification, if I may ask, would that 88B instrument restrict the usage upon forever?
Through the Chair, if it's put under an 88E instrument, which is a public positive covenant, any future development application that's lodged in relation to that, clause 1.8 won't apply in terms of removal or restrictions of covenants.
Councillors, you're happy with that? Do you want any right of reply, Councillor Turland?
No, I think it's...
Councillor Andrew, yes, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this has certainly got merit to approve, but you know, I come here often and argue that if something complies, that I'll support it all day, every day. So I, like Councillor Nelson, it's unfortunate, but it doesn't comply, so therefore I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I shall, if you don't want the right of reply, I'll put the motion. All in favour of the motion? Councillors Gandret, Turland, Halstead, Markwart and McLaughlin. Those against? Councillors Nelson, Andrews and Gare. I declare the motion carried. And we now move on to another visitor item, 9.2. Dual occupancy detached subsequent subdivision to create two lots, 210 DP 1213940 Sir James Fairfax Drive. Mr G. Kim will address council against this development.
Good afternoon, Mayor Gare and councillors. Firstly, thank you for letting me speak today, as I'm here representing more than 90 residents of Redford Park Estate who are against this proposed development. As councillors may recall during the planning process...
Just speak up.
Oh, okay. As councillors may recall during the planning process, the vision was to create a high-quality estate with a point of difference and one that is respectful to the heritage significance of the neighbouring Redford Park. This required a set of requirements beyond the Barrel DCP. The collaboration between council, local residents and James Fairfax helped define the design guidelines to ensure that this vision becomes a reality. The development application we are here discussing today does not meet these guidelines and hence the character of the estate, nor has the applicant complied with the conditions in the purchase deed agreement. Next slide, please. On a scale comparison, the proposed development is noticeably larger than the surrounding neighbours and creates a clear massing on the corner. The DA attempts to use a clause in the WLEP which assumes a precondition that you have the lawful approval to place two buildings over one lot. However, while detached dual occupancies are allowed on R2 zone land, the amenity overallowing our estate prohibits such building forms. This is why there are no other examples of this in our estate. Under the proper approval process, there will be no grounds to apply the subdivision clause. Next slide, please. What you see here is three current corner blocks. These all exhibit enhanced articulation zones featuring wraparound verandas and gables of significance, height and scale. The proposed DA's facade is out of character and the garage's setback is deeply short of the estate's requirement, which means it looks different. Gate and fencing streetscape are much wider than the allowed via the overdeveloped driveway, 6 metres on both lots compared to our estate's 3.5 and 4.5 maximum limits. Next slide, please. Furthermore, it does not contain even the most basic elements of the design guidelines that have become the DNA of our estate. The table shows considerable disparity between the proposed development and the rest of the estate. Setback, articulation, visual amenity, and the overall character are vastly different. Next slide, please. There are a few development issues which are still of concern. Dwelling 2's private open space, which is already 50% undercover, and of which the alfresco shows a block wall to the north. We question how council's requirement for winter sunlight to at least 50% of the POS can be met due to the orientation of dwelling 1, which will block the sunlight. The location and design of the alfresco on the corner of the lot is contrary to the character of all other corner lots and creates noise and privacy concern for residents. Next slide, please. Should this DA be approved, the precedents will be set for the remaining 14 corner lots to be subdivided and future builders to bypass the design guidelines. The 90+ residents opposing the development are seriously concerned for the resulting loss of privacy, increased traffic, noise, and the significant change in the character and heritage style of our estates. We have chosen to call Redford Park our home because we were hoping to build something that would be unique and long-lasting legacy for the future generations of Bowral. We ask for your continued support and ask that you vote for the refusal of this application so that the original vision of Redford Park can become a reality. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before you go, Questions in relation to this DA, Councillor Turland?
The other lots that you've shown on that plan there, are they all vacant at the moment or some been built on?
I believe they are all have something on them. There's one that's vacant but has got a DA application. The last remaining one has got a DA. So the one that's right in front of it, which is 43 Sir James Fairfax, has got a DA in council right now.
For what?
For a house.
Just a house?
Single dwelling, that's correct. Yep, one story.
So all those other ones that you've shown is there,
Yes.
have been built on already?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Are you aware that every one of these houses could have a 60 square metre house behind them?
Could.
Which is what we just went through?
Well, so our covenant, that which with the guidelines, it actually prohibits it prohibits secondary dwellings, but you can't live in them. For example, like habitable buildings, they don't allow so the guidelines only allow for like sheds and like workshops, but they don't allow for habitable buildings.
I don't think it's prohibited. It's a guideline.
Yes, sorry. So the guidelines, yeah, prohibit that.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, when you purchased your property, before your deed of sale went through, did you sign off on the deed of agreement?
Yes, I did.
And you believe everyone else in the estate would have done a similar thing, knowing what the requirements were, saying that there was no further subdivision?
Absolutely, and like even the sales agents as well, they were pretty. I guess they highlighted that there was going to be a design guideline, and even when I spoke to my solicitors as well, they also said that they advised me that there would be increased costs that I would have to comply with to meet these guidelines as well.
So this was in line with Mr. Fairfax's requirement for that estate adjoining his property. Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Any further questions?
No questions. I'll move the approval as per the recommendation.
Right, well, we'll have an introduction first as well. This is the third time it's been brought. Pardon?
We have another speaker.
Yes, no, yeah, we ask it, right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, we have Mr. Paul Samolsky, who will address council in support of this development.
Okay, so here we are again for a third time. Hopefully this matter can be considered without any preconceived position and looked at holistically. I'll be speaking in support of my DA at number 40 Sir James Fairfax Drive, Bowral, being for a permissible dual occupancy and subdivision that has council endorsement. Normally I would provide a rebuttal of the misinformation that has been stated by the spokesperson on behalf of the objectors. However, there's no need, thanks to the reporting on this DA. The report prepared by council speaks volumes. Yes, there was a petition that has been recycled for a second time, but more importantly, the report refutes all of the 8 objections that have been submitted as being unsubstantiated. The report also recommends approval, which I endorse and welcome. On that note, I thank council staff for reporting on this proposal for a third time with the same conclusion on each occasion. The purpose of this new DA, notwithstanding court proceedings, is for councillors that previously rejected the proposal to have an opportunity to reconsider their position with additional information that has been tabled. This is also an opportunity to mitigate the impost to the ratepayer. My right to build my preferred scheme on land that I've bought, relying upon the DCP and the LEP in good faith, should not be seen as inferior to anyone else in the estate. Yes, it is a dual occupancy, the second in the estates. This is an infill development that is encouraged in the local housing strategy. It provides a variety of housing and a lower entry price point, again as cited in the local housing strategy. Councillors, I invite you to look at Chapter 3, Planning Priorities 1 and 2, that are highlighted in the document before you, with the blue tag. objectives, priorities 1 and 2. Stating promote infill developments and increase densities in appropriate locations and facilitate a greater mix of housing types to ensure our housing stock is reflective of the needs of our community. However, the key aspect is that this proposal is fully compliant with council controls and the local environmental plan that prevails above all else, even if this proposal did have departures from the DCP, which it doesn't. Judges and courts remind councillors of the significance of a state LEP. It has been reviewed on 3 separate occasions by senior council planners, not once or twice, but 3 times, by different planning staff, and at each occasion a recommendation of approval has been the result. Yet some councillors choose to undermine staff and confidence in the planning system. I very much doubt council planners have got it wrong 3 times in a row. In fact, council planners have got it right and confirmed this proposal is compliant with all applicable controls. This DA is modest in its design rationale, and it has no departures of any numerical standard within the DCP or any breaches of the prevailing LEP. These are the issues a court will be looking at, not misinformation that has been circulated by some individuals. There has been previous discussions about purported covenants and estate guidelines. I've engaged my special counsel lawyers to thoroughly go through the 88B instruments, and despite these instruments having numerous restrictions and positive covenants, they do not mandate compliance with the guidelines or require a prior estate approval or state a prohibition of a dual occupancy or subdivision. Had this been the case, the estate would not have suggested that I pursue a DA application in the first instance, so an individual house is on each lot. Councillors, this is stated in the document before you dated 14th of March 2019. In the yellow manila folders where it's highlighted. Although if there was a restriction on the land, which there isn't, the local environmental plan would override and effectively obstruct the enforcement of any private guideline, which is what it effectively is. Only a guideline about aesthetic aspects such as colours, material finishes, which this proposal does not differ from. Furthermore, the suggestion of 14 corner block opportunities in the estate is factually incorrect, as there is only 6, not including mine, remaining in the actual estate with potential for a subdivision. The others have pending applications or have been built on. In fact, you don't even need to have a corner block.
That's it. Stay there.
Yep.
Any
Welcome
questions? Councillor McLaughlin.
Yep. Mr. Samosky, thank you.
Welcome.
I'll ask you the same question I asked Mr. Kim. When you bought your property, did you sign the deed of contract, which basically spelt out all the requirements that were required on this block?
Yeah, I've actually even recently looked at it.
You did sign it, yes or no?
Sorry, the matters that you referred to, I signed it, but there was no reference to a prohibition of a dual occupancy or a subdivision. That's a false suggestion by the objectors.
Well,
thank you.
That's not, well, you might...
if you show me, if you can table that, I can point me to where a subdivision is prohibited. The state clearly says to pursue a DA in the first instance.
Thank you. Councillor Turlett.
On one of the documents provided, the yellow one, it clearly says was the only way which the design matter could consider a dual occupancy is an issue is firstly the subdivision. Of course, the subdivision of the existing lot would be the first subject of council approval under the current planning code at the time of lodging. We are aware that council allows subdivisions on corner blocks in certain circumstances. Mr. Smolsky would need to take advice in relation to the proposal, and it is likelihood of success.
That's correct, yeah. I'll stand by that. I did approach the estate, Councillor Turland. I did my due diligence. I did my background on the actual matter, and I approached the estate, and explained my intentions, and they clearly said in the document that you're holding that the best option for me is to pursue a DA consent in the first instance, because their guidelines don't actually cater or do not actually have a section about dual occupancies or subdivisions. They've only got a section about a non-habitable section.
Yeah, second, I understand that. So basically what we're saying here is that Mr Robertson, I believe, wrote to you, or whoever, to you in relation to this, saying you get your subdivision through.
Yep. That's right.
Council's the only one who can approve the subdivision.
Indeed.
And it wasn't an 88B or 88, it wasn't an 88E instrument
No.
title saying you can't do it.
Well, that's right. I engaged...
Otherwise they would have said that there.
Correct.
You can't do it.
They wouldn't have suggested to go get a DA in the first instance if there was a prerequisite for an estate approval, as I outlined before.
What would they think they were going to use two lots for?
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Any further questions?
A recommendation?
No, not this stage. We'll have an introduction, I think. Thanks, Paul.
That's all. I thought there'd be more questions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
I think, seeing this is the third time it's come, Mr Wilton, would you do an introduction, please?
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider DA 200720, which seeks development consent for the purpose of a dual detached dual occupancy and a two-lot subdivision at 40 Sir James Fairfax Circuit, Bowral. Councillors would recall that two separate applications for this development were considered at the meeting of the 9th of October 2019 and also later at the meeting of the 27th of November 2019, where councillors resolved to determine the application by way of refusal, providing a number of reasons, but more importantly citing issues associated with bulk and scale, character and issues with the subdivision design guidelines. The second of those two applications was a Section 8.2 application that was lodged under the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, which was in exactly the same format as the refusal that was issued on the earlier application. The land is zoned R2 residential and dual occupancies are permitted with development consent in the zone, and subdivisions associated with approved dual occupancies are permitted in accordance with clause 7.2 of the local environment plan. The site has an area of 1,070 square metres and is gently sloping towards the rear of the site. The building topology throughout Retford Park is primarily single residential dwellings of both single and double storey construction. The merits of the proposal seek to construct one single storey 4-bedroom dwelling and a double storey 4-bedroom dwelling on a proposed 500 and 570 square metre lot respectively, and the development is compliant in terms of both Council's LEP and also DCP controls. The current development application was neighbour notified, where 8 submissions were received during that period. Those submissions included objections based on minimum lot sizes, non-compliance with the LEP and DCP controls, neighbourhood character, amenity, covenants and also overshadowing. Responses to those issues were received have been included on pages 38 to 41 in the business paper this evening. Whilst the proposal is compliant in terms of statutory controls relating to the development, council staff understand that the development has not received approval from the design review panel, which is a requirement of the 88B instrument that's associated with the land. This, however, is not a consideration of the assessment process and is a separate matter between the developer and also the proponent of the subdivision. Accordingly, council staff have recommended approval, subject to conditions on this occasion.
Thank you. And before you move, any questions?
Question.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, it's suggested here that the dual occupancy cannot be lawfully erected on this site, and it's given a couple of examples here. Basically, that it doesn't comply with the DCP, proposed with the DCP is inadequate as far as setback goes. And the other question is that there's more than 50%, less than 50% of open space on the site.
Okay, take the first question. It's in tandem.
Through the Chair, I can answer both questions. Both those matters are compliant with Council's Development Control Plan requirements. That has been assessed and it's also included in the business paper report this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
I'll move the recommendation.
Questions? Councillor Scandred. Councillor Turland. Councillor Scandred.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Wilton, in terms of the 7 blocks that I think we've heard are not built on nor have any applications pending, were those 7 owners to have a agreed position on not having a development of this type on their blocks, would that allow registration of a section 88E for Echo for those remaining 7 blocks in favour of council?
Through the chair, a Section 88E public positive covenant could be applied to those sites. However, it would require the consent of the owners prior to that being imposed on those lots.
Of those vacant owners?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
have to be on every owner on the site.
yeah, I think that's what was the vacant. Okay, clarification. Vacant blocks or all the owners of the.
Through the chair, I believe what Councillor Scandrett was referring to was in relation to corner lots, vacant corner lots.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you're going to change a covenant, you can only change it by the way of everybody on the whole land to sign off on it.
Okay, you're questioning the advice. Mr. Wilton, through you, Madam General.
Through the chair, it's the original Section 88B instrument that applies to land. If you're going to convert that across to an 88E, it is, if it's in favour of the developer of the subdivision, it only requires the consent of the actual developer in terms of the subdivision. But if you need to get the 88E signed off, you would have to go to the future owner or the current owner, if I could say it that way.
So can we do that tonight?
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through Madam GM to Mr Wilton. Mr Wilton, the specific design review panel that gets mentioned often in regard to a covenant or whatever, it's mentioned here very briefly in Council's response. This is a private matter in which Council has no role to play in their enforcement. Could you elaborate on that situation, please?
Thank you. Mr Wilton.
Through the chair, the design review panel is obviously established under the covenant. Now, if the developer was to go and develop the land and was to get an approval, it would be a matter between the developer and also the applicant for this development to take that up in civil proceedings, and that would generally be pursued in one of the Supreme Courts.
Thank you. Just got a question.
Councillor Andrews, that you're right. Yep. Councillor Nelson.
My question is, could we do a supplementary motion that could include that the 88E be implemented tonight in conjunction with this as a supplementary motion?
Okay,
for the rest of those
through
blocks?
you, Madam General Manager, Mr Wilton.
Through the chair, as I mentioned before, the 88E instrument can only be imposed with the consent of the landowner as well.
So, no, it's not. No, you're looking at. You're saying no, Mr Wilton.
Yes, he is.
Thank you. Just to clarify for councillors. Okay, so Councillor Turland, as you have the light, has. Yep, Councillor Andrews. So it's been moved. The recommendation as printed is being moved by Councillor Turland, seconded Councillor Andrews. Councillor Turland.
Notice of a motion arising.
If it's defeated. It's a direct negative. Okay. Councillor Turland.
Look, it clearly shows here that Mr Roberts, when he wrote to on the 14th of March 2019, that if you can get the subdivision through council, then we'll look at it. So it didn't say no, don't try on a subdivision. So obviously the intent for Mr Robertson was if you get the approval through the subdivision process, obviously he's not going to build one house on 2 blocks of land. That's logical. Everybody would know that. It's incredible to think that Mr Roberts would say, go to council, get the subdivision, and then come back to us. And we'll only let you build one home. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, Fairfax has paid very high-end lawyers to prepare all their documents. And now we're saying they've made a mistake. Or did they? We can't ask Mr Fairfax, he's no longer here. But the intent of dual occupancies, as we know Councillor McLaughlin owns one, is to meet the needs of the Shire's housing through different areas, also the infill. This is exactly what this is. This is infill. And every other one of those 7 lots that haven't been built on have every right, as per the letter here, that Mr Smolsky has got, go to council, get the subdivision, and then you can build, in theory, 2 houses. The DCP is clear. It allows it. I find it extraordinary that people won't allow an older lady or a disabled person or just somebody who hasn't got the sort of money to live in the whole estate to live in one of these small, quaint buildings, a lot bigger than 60 square metres, a full-on house, because they don't think it's right. It might devalue the property. It might do the other thing. It might increase the value of the properties around. Because you could have somebody living up the road who's built a home, who's in their 70s. One of their partners has died. Their family lives in the same estate. They want to live in the same estate where they've owned their house for the last 4 or 5 years. Well, we won't let them. We let them move on. They can go somewhere else to live, not live in the community that they actually live in, where they have lived in. But even if not, the housing strategy that's been brought here tonight, and hopefully we'll approve it, to meet the needs of the Shire with infill. It's exactly what it is. If we didn't want it, what council could have done, and so could have the developer, has made them 990 square metres, and it could not be subdivided. End of story, done and dusted. But no, this is over 1,000 square metres. It complies. I remember Renwick, we had a statement in there that you can build dual occupancies at Renwick and you can build them over at Nanai Ponds if they're over 1,000 square metres. But the issue in Renwick was we didn't want 2-storey. We encourage you not to build 2-storey. It's ridiculous. That was in the DCP of the whole Mittagong. But we allowed 2 stories in Mittagong, not just Renwick. I don't think there's a problem with this particular development proposal. And I think if it goes to court, and some of the documents that Mr Robertson's already provided to the applicant, go to council, get the subdivision, and if you get it, come back. That's what he's done. And the overriding approval is these guys, us. More these guys. Because there's only one person here qualified, and that's Mr Halstead. None of us are other qualified. But council staff and Councillor Halstead.
Thank you, Councillor Turland. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking against the recommendation, Mr Mayor, and it's quite obvious that I voted twice on this, Mr Mayor, and I haven't changed my opinion. This was a development set out by James Fairfax that surrounds a significant heritage item in our Shire. Now, you know, you can build at all sorts of areas within our Shire. You can buy small blocks at Natai Ponds, you can buy blocks at Renwick, there are blocks available in Mossvale. So there's a mix. Mr Fairfax left his estate to the National Trust. To cover that, he set up what he thought, and maybe he did miss something, Councillor Turland, but I don't know. His idea was that there would be a board, there would be covenants, so that the people that bought premier blocks in an estate that was going to be an exclusive, expensive area would be not undermined by further subdivisions. That's my impression. That's the letter that we've received from Mr Alan Robinson, who came here many, many times and spoke to us when this subdivision was going through with regard to what Mr Fairfax, James Fairfax, wanted to see. He wanted to see this as a really top-notch development. He didn't want to see it undermined. And I feel sorry for the people that will see the value of their properties somewhat compromised, can I say, by further subdivision. Now, these people have signed on to an deed of agreement. Our developer, Mr Samowski, he's also signed on to it. I can't understand why these people can abide by it and someone's found a way to say, well, hang on, this doesn't apply to me. I think it should apply to everyone. Now, if we can't uphold it, and it doesn't look like we can, as we've heard from Mr Wilton, it's not in our, it's not an 88E or an 88B instrument, so therefore it doesn't hold any water, which is unfortunate. But when he does get approval on this, I think there'll be another very deep-pocketed entity, the developer, that will make sure that these people that have spent good money on quality blocks will not see it decimated by someone doing dual occupancies and subdivisions. So maybe the developer should think about just building one house on that block and get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'd firstly like to apologise to Mr Kimney's family. Beaten by technicality, poor advice and 71 square metres. But reading the report, I find that a number of the reasons for refusal are eliminated, leaving the case for refusal weak. Specifically item 4, the advice from the design review panel. I've also read the neighbour notification objections and council staff response. I think they speak for themselves, Mr Mayor. One issue of objection states, whilst the proposed development is permissible, that does not mean it should be permitted. Now that's true. But my next question is, would council succeed in the Land and Environment Court? And my answer is no. Therefore, I make the decision for all the ratepayers in the Shire, and while it's hard to refuse the 90 signatories objectors to this proposal, I just can't use ratepayers' money, up to $80,000, to fight a losing battle. And I remind you, Mr Mayor, council, on a principle, wasted $600,000 in the water bottle development at Bundanoon. I think you remember that. Fighting on a principle for the residents of the where the trucks would pass. Council lost that one. Lost that on a principle, 600,000. So it's tough here, Mr Mayor, for councillors to make the hard decisions versus a principled decision, but that's my position. And I think that possibly council should be going and having a look at these developments once they're constructed and just have a look and see if we've made the right decision or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Markle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much. Okay. Basically, as a general rule, I'm happy to support DAs, especially if they have a social component or social benefit. Things like over 55, dare I mention, things like that. I don't see that's the case here. And I see residents and people who oppose this development being quite vocal, petition and such like, and I have some sympathy for their position. I think the development, as shown, is a significant size development. It is of considerable bulk, considerable potential loss of amenity. So I'm inclined to support the residents who are opposing this and basically say, let's test this and see the outcome. I have no problem ending up in court, or at least council ending up in court on this. That's our job. If we have a few court cases, we win or lose, we know where that boundary is. I think this is an interesting and an important case to actually test. So I will be opposing this, the recommendation, and if it goes to court, so be it. That will give us some guidelines for the future, and I look forward to that outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Markwood. Councillor Scandra.
Well said, Councillor, because this is about maintaining standards and trying to provide a wide mix over the whole Shire. As Councillor McLaughlin said, there are different types in different areas and different sizes and intents. This one is quite clear, I think, for those of us who have been on council for a while and those who have taken the time to look up its history. We've seen this email here today. It actually doesn't really support what's being argued by the applicant today, because its owners have an obligation under contract to Redford Park Estate from whom they purchased the land. That's fine. This email quite clearly says that once you subdivide the land, that would be a matter for you and council. The design panel's responsibility is to the Redford Park Estate. Well, this applicant apparently had approached the design panel prior to execution of the contract for purchase. So he wasn't the legal owner of the lot, and he certainly hasn't submitted, according to documents we've been sent, any plans since then for formal approval. We're quite clear that the design panel don't favour it, and that represents the views of both the estate and the members of the estate. This development application doesn't change from the last two that have been here in any way. which have been previously refused by council. And the reasons they were refused included a number of key points, and I'll just read those out to you, because they include bulk and scale, they include not consistent with local amenity, traffic, basic amenity, unique characteristics of the estate, and certainly Redford Park, the Italianic mansion, and of course the design review panel, which of course doesn't quite carry weight here. The bulk and scale are right up there because they're out of character with the surrounding development, and the traffic flow. But when we look at this on an objective basis, Mr Mayor, and I note your previous position on this as being really concerned and being against this proposal. The purchaser's deed of agreement, if we're going to swing around that, it wasn't executed before the purchase. It's as simple as that. But when the purchase took place, it was part of the contract, and the application has not been submitted since. So I think it's, again, a matter for rejection, and I'll be saying that in my motion arising, which I hope we will get to.
Councillor Halstead.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I remember about 2 years ago, I think it was, someone came to me and I knew them pretty well, and they said, oh, I've bought a block of land, or two, I forget what it was, up in the Fairfax estate, and my God, they're going to be product houses there because there's this special provision over it. And I said to him at the time, you're probably talking about a covenant. Anyway, I won't go into the rest of the discussion, but clearly covenants not worth the paper they're written on when it comes to planning provisions. That's the problem. The current LEP is a product of a standard LEP which was introduced across this state by the state government. Planners can agree with that, I'm sure. In every LEP, as long as I can ever recall, and I can remember dealing with one dated 68, wasn't there at that time, but I dealt with it probably a decade after that, had the same clause in there, and it was in intra-development orders as well. It said the provisions of a covenant from the point of view of planning issues are overridden, something to that effect. So it doesn't matter a damn what's in a covenant. If it's contrary to what's in an LEP, that's the end of the issue. Now, having said that, you've got to realise also that the development control plans, I don't think they're worth much either. That's my personal opinion, because they're guidelines only, and the court will tell you that consistently. However, they're there, so they're a form of control, if you like, which councils have to look at. Now, one of the things councils have been criticised of many times over many years is they let the council, they determine an application by refusal to let the court make the decision. They've been criticised a lot about that. In this case, I'm inclined to think that's what I think could happen. However, what comes out of that court will be, in my opinion, an approval. Now, that's the way I see it, because, as I've just said before, the standards, and they are standards when they're in an LEP, and what's in the DCP, you can see here, this application, this proposal, complies with it. I mean, I think it's abysmal in terms of not this proposal, but this whole idea about corner blocks being able to be subdivided. I remember going off my head about the ones over here in King Street, I think it was, in Mossvale, same thing. You could just keep going, taking off a quarter of an acre and then another quarter of an acre, and away you went. Now, this one here is more straightforward, and it's saying every corner block, if it can be 1,000 square metres, which would have to have been, I would think, for this subdivision to get up, they can be the subject of the same sort of application. But on this issue, I'm going to be refusing it as well, or going on with refusal, but I'm quite convinced that the applicant will go to court, and I'm quite convinced, again, what will come out of that court will be an approval. Got no doubt about that, because of the conditions that are here. And dare I say it, courtesy of the current and former state governments.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, for me, this is an issue of good faith. And those councillors that have been on council for a while will remember when Mr Fairfax or Alan Robertson came to council and requested that we look at rezoning that land. And the council of the day, in their wisdom, said, well, look, you know, we're not in the habit of just rezoning land. What's in it for the community? And tongue-in-cheek, we said, what about the homestead? You know, what are you going to do after you pass away? Are you going to bequeath that to the community? And that was a tongue-in-cheek statement. But lo and behold, that's exactly what Mr Fairfax did. And I had a couple of occasions to meet with Mr Fairfax and discuss his visions around that estate. And I'd have to say that it's reflected in this correspondence that we received from Mr Robertson. And the desire here, as it said, of James Fairfax was to make the subdivision a model estate with new homes on generous allotments and sympathetic in design to the heritage significance of the Redford Park homestead. Now, I don't think we can turn a blind eye to that because, in good faith, people that have signed up to live in this estate put their signatures forward, understanding that that was the desire of James Fairfax, and that's what they were signing up to. So to come along to put your name on a dotted line and say, no, I was only joking, I think, you know, is a little bit, I think, bold. And as I said, for me, it's all a question of good faith. And I think if somebody commits to some standards, then they should be consistent with that. We look at some of the other points raised in Mr Robertson's correspondence, and states here, if the two dwellings proposed were erected, they would not comply with the requirement that the built area was 50% or less of the site. So it's that slow incremental encroachment. We've spoken before, we've heard residents from Colo Vale saying about the characteristics of their village. We're talking about local strategic planning strategies and maintaining what it is that we hold valuable. So I think it's important, and I think, you know, that we need to maintain our integrity and our good faith to Mr Fairfax and his estate, given that we've agreed to that in principle and in good faith. So I will be voting against the recommendation and encouraging those residents to continue their fight to maintain their little part of the Southern Highlands.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Third time round, staff have presented an application that's fully compliant. This is the third time, and Lord knows how many months. We tend to, I believe, on occasion, make out a developer or developers as being the villains in these respective developments. This thing complies, and we tend to forget also that, like all of us here, these people have got a right to eke out a living. This type of development also supports many local trades as well as retail businesses local. He's entitled to build this thing, to go forward with it. And if I can, and just to quote the applicant's thoughts here, and it epitomises what I believe and I've always stood up here and spoken about. I have every right to build on a block of land that I purchased in good faith, as do all the other residents. My aspirations of the report clearly stated my proposal may not, to everyone's expectation, but it is fully consistent with the objectives of not only the Development Control Plan, but more importantly, the Wingecarribee Local Environment Plan, which we all know prevails above all else. In actual fact, guidelines or development control plans are subordinate to state policy, such as the SEP or the LEP. It's a great pity. This is the third time round. I trust Councillor Halstead's wisdom here, and I support Councillor Nelson's fear of a loss in court.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Well, before you have the right of reply, Councillor, who moved it? Councillor Turlin. I voted twice against this. Reading the report for the third time, and looking at it as closely as I can, I'm going to support this DA. I know it doesn't make any difference whether I do or if I don't. I can count the numbers. I would like to say to the councillors, it has been one of the better debates we've had in the chamber for a while, and everybody has just expressed an opinion. What I would urge, and before it even gets into court, there's going to be a pre-court hearings and mediation, whatever, to try and come to an agreement. The problem that I have is that the covenant is not with council, it is with the developer. And as such, any action has to be taken, even if we go to court. There will be some cost to be borne by the developer, the developer, in my opinion, not Mr. Sawalski, as in the developer of the Fairfax estate, Redford Park. I don't know how strong that would stand up in court, and we'll just have to wait and see. But I do suggest that the parties, when you have your pre-court hearings, that you meet and see whether you can find a common ground before it goes to a full court appearance. Because as Councillor Nelson has said, it meets, and Andrews, it has met in Turland, it's met all the planning requirements. I've gone through it and looking at the bulk and scale, out of character, not in public interest, increased traffic flow, setting a precedent. I don't think in that locality, with the amount of through traffic, any of those will stand up. But it is inconsistent with the aims and objectives of the design review panel and original developer of the subdivision. That is, as been pointed out, is not council's issue. It is the covenant placed on it by the people who owned the land. So that's my suggestion. As I say, I can do the numbers and it will be probably a 5-4, and that's the way it will be. But if I can urge the applicant and the developer to try and sit down and work out some way that you can both live in the same neighbourhood and be neighbourly neighbours. Councillor McLaughlin.
I'll wait for the vote, but I've got a motion to put up. Have you?
If I put the motion as moved by Councillor Turland, against the motion as moved by Councillor Turland. For is Councillors Andrew, Nelson, Gare and Turland. Those against, I lost myself there, and that's because the motion is lost. The motion is lost. We now have a foreshadowed motion, or a motion arising. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your support on this, because I think this is quite an important one. Councillor Whipper says in good faith. Now, my foreshadowed motion becomes that the development application for erections and buildings, you can cut and paste it, I guess, from the existing thing, right? Is refused for the following reasons. And I'll hand those up if I may, Mr. Pepping.
I'm happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Wilton, thank you. Those ones.
So we'll wait a couple of seconds while it goes up.
Yep. I'll just speak to it briefly, and there's a part 2 to it, Mr. Mayor, which is about...
And is seconded by Councillor McLaughlin?
Yes, it is. And there's a part 2 to it, which you've actually picked up on, and that is inviting the owners of the undeveloped corner blocks on the estate to submit an application to lodge a Section 88E for Echo Public Positive Covenant going forward, which would protect those remaining blocks that are undeveloped. And I
don't think that can happen. It can't happen.
Councillor Turland, I will get clarification from planning staff Councillor, Mr Wilton, through you, General Manager.
So to be quite precise, so Mr Wilton can address it, I'm proposing that the owner, we invite, I think that's the right words, we invite the owners of the undeveloped corner blocks in the estate, undeveloped, to submit an application to lodge a Section 88B public policy covenant in favour of council.
Can that be included, Mr Wilton, and is it possible?
Through the Chair, it would be a separate item. This is dealing with the application before us. Again, the consent of those landholders, we can invite them, we can't force them.
I've got the right words. Okay.
Okay, so no, it will be. It will come as a notice of motion at another time.
All right. So this is just a refusal of the motion that you saw there, with the reasons I've handed up, which include 1 through to 7, inconsistent with the original aims of the original subdivision and the contracts of purchase of land. That's it.
Okay,
I'll
so that's
just speak to that briefly, and this is standing up for what's right on this estate, looking after the interests of what Mr Fairfax set out to do in good faith, and of course everyone, the applicant can build on that block. There's nothing stopping him building on that block a dwelling.
Councillor Scand, with
Thank
the
you.
chair, please. Okay, so there's the recommendation. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Same way, Councillor Scandrett, Whipper, Halstead, Markwart and McLaughlin. Those against? Councillors Andrews, Turland and Nelson and Gare. I declare the motion carried, and thank you very much for your interest in this matter. We move now on to 11.1, proposed licence agreement H&D Roofing, 515 Loftus Street, Bowral. Moved Councillor Andrews, seconded Councillor Markwart. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Scandrett.
I'll just wait for the chamber. Mr Mayor, I just want to seek clarification that there is a mention of this in the report, but just want to hear it in front of the chamber. And that is, were Stage 2 of Station Street to go ahead, the actual original bypass, we could terminate this lease on 3 months' notice. Is that correct, Mr Paul?
Through you, Madam General Manager, Mr Paul.
We can terminate the licence agreement with 3 months' notice for whatever reason, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. So who moved it? Moved Councillor, I think it was moved already. Andrews and Markwart, yes. So put the recommendation. All in favour? Those against? Carried. We move on to page 75, proposed acquisition of land in Bowral. And Coes, you're happy to move that, Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Nelson. Any discussion? Put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. 11.5, application. 11.3. Oh yes, there is 2 there. 11. There it is on the back. Proposed transfer of Crown Road, Old Wingelow Road, Bundanoon, and Quarry Road, Bundanoon. Moved Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Halstead. Any discussion? Put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. 11.4, consolidation of titles, Mittagong Depot, 9 Cavendish Street, Mittagong. Moved Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Whipper.
Question, if I can, please.
Question from Councillor Turland.
These are 3 allotments, and looking at the plan that we've been given here on page 83, it would seem that we've actually illegally built over 3 lots. How did council approve illegally building over their own 3 lots that weren't consolidated?
Question through Madam General Manager.
Nobody else can do that.
To who's going to answer that one?
They're all left.
It's a take it on notice.
Well, what I'm trying to make a point is that there's only one group that could ever build illegally over 3 lots. It's not me and you. It's council.
Thank you. Do you want to take that on notice? No.
It's logical that they would do it.
Councillor Scandrett?
I move the motion, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, well, it was moved by Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Whipper. Put it. All in favour? Those against? Carried. We move to adoption of cemetery policy.
No, but 11.5.
Where am I?
Mr Mayor, I'll move the recommendation on that one, I think.
Oh, yes, it's application. Application of transfer of unmade road, Crown Road to Council Part Surrey Street, Berrima. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, we heard from the neighbour. Seconder? Yeah.
Councillor Andrews,
Thank you.
moved. Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Andrews.
Oh, you want a question?
Do you want a question
Yep, okay.
first? Questions to staff in relation to this?
It shows the...
Councillor Turley.
Page 90, it shows the shaded area, and page 89 shows another. 89 will be kept in public use, is that how I read it? And 90 will be what could be transferred, is that what I understand?
Yeah,
Could we allow
through-
Mr. Mooney to stand to the microphone?
I've already got 90.
Mr Mooney.
So what is it, just this bit?
Yeah.
Through you, Mr Mayor. In response to your question, Councillor, the aerial that's depicted on page 90 is land that was transferred into private ownership some several years ago. Yep. The aerial that's depicted on page 89 is the land which is the subject of this report.
Could we put those photos up?
No, we've all got the photos in front of us. No, Councillor Turlin.
Well, the issue is that I think it's too much land onto the creek, on the river, that should be given, that's all. I think it should stop at the same line. Sorry? Well...
Okay, okay, the questions are...
Again, can I get Mr. Mooney to explain the purpose of this report? Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr Mayor. To clarify, councillors, the land which is depicted on page 90 is already in private ownership. Correct. It's not the subject of this report. There's absolutely nothing that we can do regarding that. The land which is the subject of this report is shown on page 89, which is the remainder of the unformed road, Surrey Street.
Okay, does that clarify, or have you got another question? Mr. Councillor Whipper?
Question.
Question?
Yeah, question. Now, I know this has got a bit of a history, but what I'm trying to understand is that it's Crown land. So council have been asked to make a decision on this. Now, just my question is, say we did a backflip and decided that, yeah, we would support the sale of this land, would that make any inroads with the Crown Lands Department or not?
Mr. Mooney?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillor, that's quite correct. We've been notified by Crown Land. They are the authority who will ultimately determine whether the land will be disposed of and sold to the adjoining property owner. Council's been notified as the local government authority. Its position is something that the Department of Crown Land take into consideration. However, after this matter was briefly considered at the last council meeting, we sought some further advice from the Crown, and our understanding is that the matter regarding the disposal of land has already been dealt with, and the decision has been made that they won't be disposing of the land.
No, it's just curious that it's sent back to us to make a decision then. Yeah,
Thank
when they've
you.
made the decision.
Councillor McLaughlin, question?
No, I'm just moving the recommendation.
Okay, any more questions, seeing it was asked to be introduced? Councillor Scandrett? And Councillor McLaughlin is flagging.
I'm flagging an amendment, Mr Mayor, but my question is, would it be easy for us to pop down and do an inspection on this, Mr Mooney? Is there any restrictions in access other than wombat holes?
Through you, Madam General Manager, Mr Mooney.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I don't believe there would be any impediment for council to attend an on-site briefing. However, as I previously stated, the matter is ultimately for the Department of Crown Lands to determine, and as we understand it, that determination has been made.
Yeah, and are you aware what consultation was undertaken with the Berrima community, Mr. Mooney?
Through you, Madam General Manager, Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's not a question that we've posed of the Department of Crown Land.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, so we have a recommendation moved by Councillor McLaughlin, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Your amendment, Councillor...
The matter be deferred pending a site inspection and consultation. I have a seconder, I believe.
Councillor Whipper. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I think most of us locals, when those pictures came up and showed the rope and the swimming hole where you could swim across the river, climb up the rocks, swing out off the rope, I think the right decision's been made here by the Department of Lands. They've already made this, or Crown Lands have already made a decision. So I don't see any point in doing a visit. At first I thought I didn't know where this was, and I thought maybe we should go and have a look at it, but I know exactly where it is because I've swung on that rope or off that tree. It's still there. Maybe the same rope. But look, my concern is if that became private land, and we heard from the applicant today that hundreds of people go there in the summer to swim across, Mr. Mayor, swim across. If that became private land, they could put a sign up, you know, private land, keep out. You know, I just think this has been something that the people of the Shire have used for many, many generations. And to take that and put it in private hands, I'm sorry, it's not something that should happen. It should stay exactly where it is. As we've heard from staff in the briefing, if in the future something developed on that side of Berrima and people wanted to have access down to the river, it would be cut off in perpetuity. So even though I have sympathy for the neighbour that wants to keep it nice and look after all the, you know, the weeds and what have you, I still think it needs to stay exactly where it is, so it's got access for the community and for people that swim across, the kids that swim across and want to climb up there on the rocks and swing off, they should have that right.
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, just a quick note to say that I worry about people swimming in the river, Mr. Mayor.
They swim at their own risk, sure.
Yeah, until they want to sue council. Third litigious state in the world. Thanks very much.
Sue the Crown Land.
Yeah, sue the Crown. Yes, I hope so. But I don't know why we're building swimming pools then, or keeping them going.
Okay, Councillor Scandrick.
Mr. Mayor, I'm equally concerned about loss of public access and all that, but I do want to go down there and understand it, and I think that's the very least we can do as elected officials. And you can wear your red budgies down, Councillor Townend, right, and all of that. I'll wear my flippers, we'll be right, and some of us might swing on the end of a rope, but we'll just see how that works. So that's why I'm recommending that we just defer the matter, Mr. Mayor, and we do a site inspection, and I'm interested in the lack of consultation also.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrick. Councillor Turland.
Well, you know, I spent money time on that swing as well over the years, and I've taken the kids down there as well, and we spent a lot of time in the car park across the road, even when I was younger. Spent a lot of nights there from the pub. Anyway, so I know the place well, and I know the rocks, and I hope that rope has changed. I haven't been on it for 30 years. Okay, maybe 40 years. But I see that there's an access that's already there, that people can go from Wingecarribee Street in theory all the way down without actually having to swim across the river. It is already there. But it's probably fenced off and you probably can't physically walk through there. But so it would seem the decision's already been made from what I picked up that they're not going to allow it anyway. So this is just going around the circle for no real purpose. So, except for Councillor Scandrick, I think you might have to take your own rope if you're going to swim.
Okay, Councillor Marquardt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. I'll be supporting the motion. The recommendation, of course. I'd just like to mention someone who hasn't been mentioned by any of the councillors here, the wombats, of course. I know it sounds a bit maybe, but they do live in holes. They need somewhere to live. So I think keep this in public ownership. Crown, council, doesn't matter, but public owned land is useful for wildlife and we need to respect them. And I do recall one time I went down there, on the other side I must admit, I was dressed as a giant koala, and my friend was dressed as a giant platypus, and he went for a swim. He got a photo in the paper. And if anyone wants to see the benefit of all this, I can give you the photo. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Markwart. There's a story, by the sounds of it, there's a lot of stories in relation to this bit of river. So we have a recommendation as moved by Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Whipper. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye, or show of hands. No, he didn't have a seconder for his...
Councillor Whipper.
Oh, Councillor Whipper second. Okay, I'm sorry, I haven't got that up. So we'll... The amendment... Yeah. Okay.
No,
the first one has been moved. The actual recommendation has been moved by Councillor McLaughlin and seconded Councillor Andrews. And then there was an amendment moved by Councillor Scandrett, seconded by Councillor Whipper. I take your point, Councillor Whipper. So we put the amendment first. All in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Councillors Scandrett and Whipper. Those against the amendment, I declare the amendment lost. I now put the motion. All in favour of the motion, and it is carried the same way. Thank you. We now move on to 11.6, adoption of the cemetery policy. Move Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Markwart. Is there any discussion? It's been out on exhibition. Very few submissions, 3. So put it, all in favour, those against, carried. 12.1, outcome of direct negotiations, customer relationship and document management system. We can...
Only if you want to go into close.
No, I'm going to move recommendation.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Sorry, I was just asking if we could have, for the public's interest, an introduction on this.
Madam General Manager, would you answer the question?
It's either go into confidential or adopt the recommendation in closed.
Move we adopt.
Confidential, number 1.
Okay then.
So what are we doing?
Councillors, please follow the lights. Councillor Scandrett had his light on. Councillor Scandrett.
Yes, moving we adopt the recommendation number 1. Thank you. And I have a seconder, I believe.
Okay, so Councillor Scandrett, Councillor Nelson have moved point 1 of the recommendation. Right? Everybody clear on that? That's what we're moving. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, I look forward to this system coming on board and merging together our various other systems. It'll enable greater accountability. Ultimately, it will be referenced back into our GIS mapping system, which will mean that people who are lodging inquiries and so on will be able to reference that. I look forward to the fact that it integrates a whole lot of existing information, and going forward, one of the benefits of this is that you will see a flagging of a response time and those sort of things coming up through the system so that management can make sure that we're responsive with our customer, or I call them shareholders, but anyway, customer responses and customer service. So I think it's a great movement forward. Long overdue. It's taken a while. I applaud the staff on their effort in getting through this, because it came to us last year and there were concerns about the various systems out there, so we resolved to put it all into one reference, and back it's come. So I'm happy to move this.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Markwart.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I certainly support the implementation of a CRM system within Council. I think it's a good step in the right direction. But I'd just like to flag it will not solve all the issues. So I just want to set some expectations here. I have worked with large corporations, including Telstra and what have you, and I had the joy of calling Telstra over the last week or two about my broadband NBN service.
Good luck with that.
Their CRM system leaves a little to be desired, and I suggest for Council that can be a benchmark. If you get better than that, you've got my vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, put the recommendation. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We're back on to...
No, we're not. I have to read.
Oh, we have to read the recommendation.
That's right,
that
I've
was,
got
passed.
And the recommendation that the Council has adopted is that Council accepts the joint tender from Technology One Limited at a lump sum of $582,027.50, inclusive of GST, to undertake the implementation of a customer relationship management system and electronic document records management system, with the lump sum including a 5-year support and maintenance agreement. Now
Okay.
we're on to
10, page...
12.2.
Yeah, 12.2, page 108. DA is determined. Any questions? So moved by Councillor Whipper, second by Councillor Halstead. All in favour? Any questions first? No, all in favour? Unanimous. Next page. Maybe if I can find the next page. Page 126, 12.3, DA is received. Any Councillor Whipper moves, Councillor second, and Councillor Nelson. Any questions in relation to these? Councillor Scandrett, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I have asked in the briefing prior to today about a matter at 93 to 95 Kirkham Road. I'm just wondering what the outcome of that research was, please. Well, that's why I'm trying to find out where it is.
Through the Chair, we've made inquiries of the staff and we'll come back to you tomorrow.
Right. Well, just give notice I want to call it up, and I believe Councillor Halstead was happy to do that with me. Thank you.
You mentioned that in our briefing session, did you not?
I thought we'd be responsible.
Okay, that's fine. Well, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. With item 7 on page 127, can I be assured that that's been called up?
It's on the screen.
Oh, it's on the screen. Oh, sorry, I was looking at the page. Thank you. That's great.
Any more on there while we're looking at the screen? Councillors? No? Put the motion, all in favour? Unanimous. Page 135, 12.4, Wingecarribee Housing Strategy. Briefing session if we can. Can we have an introduction, please?
Thank you, and through the Chair, Councillors, I am again happy to introduce the draft Wingecarribee Local Housing Strategy, which aims to provide a long-term planning framework for our housing needs within our Shire and will guide the decisions of Council, the private industry and our community in delivering new living areas and a greater diversity of housing to meet the needs of our community. So by way of background, councillors, the local planning strategy was adopted by Council in 2015 and conditionally endorsed by the department. But in endorsing the strategy, they did not endorse the housing component, as it relied almost solely on infill development to meet our housing needs. And the department at the time recommended that Council prepare a housing strategy which looked at greenfield development options to provide a range of housing opportunities to meet the needs of our community. So councillors, my team, with our assets, environment and GIS teams, have put together a housing strategy that we believe will deliver a greater housing diversity to meet the needs of our community, but also provide certainty to the community in the location of new development, certainty to the private industry, certainty to council in funding new infrastructure, and will allow council to make informed investment decisions and will help build confidence in the decision-making processes of the council. So the strategy includes a detailed information about our changing demographics, which highlight a clear disconnect between our housing needs and our current housing stock. The strategy outlines 3 key planning priorities for the Shire. So firstly, to promote infill development and facilitate a greater mix of housing types, to provide a greater mix of price points in the market and facilitate an increase in social and community housing, and provide for well-planned new release areas to ensure that our communities are supported by essential infrastructure. And each of the planning priorities has a set of actions and performance indicators that will allow us to monitor and measure the success of the strategy. And where we're not meeting our housing needs, we'll be able to adapt the strategy and adapt our planning framework to make sure that over the long term that we continue to meet the housing needs of our community. So we also identify 6 new living areas. and those living areas are proposed to be staged over a 30-plus year period, and the new living areas were identified through an evidence-based objective analysis that looked at the constraints of the land, a multi-criteria suitability analysis based on sound planning principles, the provision of infrastructure, visual impacts assessments to give the council and the community confidence in how we will plan for and manage growth within our Shire. So councillors, this is a fairly bold strategy, but it's one that is based on a really sound evidence base to give the community confidence in the decision-making process of council. And the report recommends that we go out on exhibition for a period of 8 weeks. And I want to be really clear to council and the community that this is the start of a consultation process. This is by no means the final strategy. We want to engage the community in good faith, and at the end of that 8-week exhibition period, take on board the views of the community and come back to council with recommendations based on the outcomes of that exhibition.
Questions to
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Park?
Congratulations, Mr. Parks, and your team. Great effort, and I know you brought this to us once before, and we delayed it. But my question today, given that we heard from Mr. White with regard, I was wondering if you'd like to just pick up on some of the comments that he made and the reasons with Wesleydale being a heritage item. So I think I can take from what you said that this is not done and dusted. So it's a proposal. So this one here, given, I just thought you might like to comment on some of the points raised by Mr. White with regard to Colavale, the transport, the heritage fires and so forth.
Thank you, and through the chair. Look, it's a good question, and the reason that I think it's important that we start to go out on exhibition so we can have a proper conversation with the community based on an evidence base. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what's included in the strategy, what it does and what it doesn't do. The strategy doesn't rezone any land. It sets the future, where we predict the future growth of the Shire to occur based on an objective analysis. Some of the comments made around likening the site to the Wilton growth area, which has some 15,000 houses. I mean, that's almost as many houses in the Shire. And what we want to do is start to have this conversation with the community about what we're actually proposing, which is in the order of about 500 houses, and that would be dependent on a number of things. And that would be assessment of the heritage curtilage around the existing Wensleydale building, and that would likely result in a significant reduction in the developable area. And certainly some of the constraints that were raised, things like the bushfire constraints, the area that was proposed a number of years ago has been significantly reduced based on bushfire prone area plus a significant buffer off the bushfire prone area. So we're talking about a significant buffer off vegetated areas. The actual area to be zoned would be subject to a detailed body of work, and that's all outlined in the strategy, some of the studies that would need to be done to demonstrate a suitable developable area. But again, this is about putting this out for consultation. It's by no means a finalised plan, and we'll certainly take on board the views of the community in finalising the strategy.
So to follow, it just may or may not happen at Wensleydale, is what you're saying.
Look, no, this is at the moment it is a draft strategy yet to be on exhibition. Ultimately, we'll take on board the feedback of the council and make a recommendation to the council after the exhibition period.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Park, and to your staff for this report and the various consultations. I think we're still a bit back to front on this because we've got this
question.
Local housing strategy, yes, and so on. But why are we doing this at the same time as the draft local strategic planning statement, and we haven't, as you've just outlined, done a number of assessments that I would have thought would have been done before this came to council, such as the heritage and the bushfire.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Mr. Park.
Thank you, and through the chair, look, there is never a perfect time to do strategies. What we know is that at the moment we do not have an endorsed housing strategy, and the local strategic planning statement will be the basis of all decisions made on reviewing our LEP. So without having an endorsed housing strategy to feed into the local strategic planning statement, we are at risk, and I bring your attention back to Chelsea Gardens as a good example. We are at risk of losing control over how our Shire grows. This is about setting a really clear vision that is hopefully reflective of the community values, and that's what we're going to go out and start to have this conversation with the community. And I'll also make the point that a lot of this stuff is not things that we've just thought up. These are based on stuff from the community strategic plan, based on things out of the local planning strategy and some of the information that the community have told us over a number of years. And this is about setting a really clear vision so that as a council and as a community, we're the ones who control how the Shire grows, not private developers coming in and doing spot rezonings and being overruled by the state government. This is about us setting a really clear framework.
Yeah, question.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I was interested in what Mr White had to say, considering his credentials and experience. Transport, no trains, cars, Wilton, green between, bushfire threat, inconsistencies, biodiversity. So there was all those things he wrote down, unique quality, heritage. But he did sort of say that you were reactive to the department. Now, my question is, could you just explain a little bit more why you're reactive to the department, so to speak? Why are we doing this?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Through you, Madam General Manager. Mr Park.
Thank you, and through the Chair. Councillors, I'll make 2 points. One is that we are, rightly or wrongly, subject to state government legislation, and there is a planning hierarchy which puts the state government plans and regional plans above our planning framework, and our planning framework is to give effect to the regional plan. But I'll also make the point that this housing strategy is not about being guided by the state government. It's actually about the opposite. It is about, as a council, us taking control over how we're going to grow into the future. And I make no apologies for having a bold strategy about how we're going to grow so that we can start to, as a council and as a community, have greater certainty and greater consistency in the way that we assess planning proposals, have greater certainty in the provision of infrastructure so that our guys upstairs, our infrastructure and assets team, can start to plan for infrastructure to make sure that we can, as a council, continue to meet the needs of our community. And I think that that is a really important function of the council, is to plan for the future. So I don't think it's about addressing the department's needs, it's about addressing our community's needs.
Thank you. And Councillor Whipper.
Thank you. That was a great segue. Thank you, Mr Park. If we are addressing the community's needs, my question is, why are we putting the housing strategy before our local character statements? So why are we running these together, not getting the sense of what the community expect before we establish our housing strategy?
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Mr Park.
Thank you, and through the Chair, again, we are at risk without a housing strategy. So if we put in a local strategic planning statement, which again will inform all decisions on the LEP, if we have that without an endorsable position on housing, we run the risk of private industry dictating how this Shire will grow. And it may be that some of the sites, different sites are the way to go, but we need to start to plan for the future and have a position that is reflective of the community's values and of our housing needs, so that when private developers come in with planning proposals that are inconsistent with council strategy, we have a defendable position. So I don't think that deferring the housing strategy so that we can get the local strategic planning statements up is the best way forward for council, because of the significant risk it poses to us in terms of losing control.
Thank you. Councillor Markward.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. My question is for Mr Park. If theoretically Wesleydale and Robertson were excluded from this housing strategy, I presume, and I appreciate the comments, this would leave us with a shortfall. What are the options to address that shortfall, if there is one? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Park, through you, Madam General Manager.
Thank you, and through the Chair. Look, I'll make the point that this housing strategy is about a lot more than Wensleydale and about a lot more than Robertson, and it is about the housing needs of our community. And the strategy, its first priority is still about accommodating growth through infill development, providing an appropriate mix of housing types, But we need to measure all of the, we need to balance all of these competing priorities. So on one hand, we know the community wants to protect the character of our existing towns and villages. And if we start to accommodate all our growth through infill development, how do you do that? How do you protect the existing character when you're talking about changing it? So this is about trying to get an appropriate balance. Look, if the council are of the view that they don't want to support any particular site within that, that's council's decision. We've put up a recommendation based on a sound evidence base, but ultimately it's council's decision. I genuinely believe that we need to go out and have these conversations with the community based on an evidence base rather than speculation about a new Wilton and these sorts of things. Let's put this information out to the community and start to have a meaningful conversation.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, we've got a few more questions to go yet, I think. Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, I don't disagree with having planning strategies or housing strategies. In fact, I was responsible together with one other planner here for East Barrel, and we see where that is today, so you've got to have it. What I'm very concerned about is that when you do this, that you've got to be right. In other words, you've got to make sure that then, when it does proceed to the next level, you are having an influence over it, based upon, as you said, sound evidence-based. I don't know what the next word was, but that was enough for me, because what you've got to be sure of is when you identify an area, that it surely, well, let me backtrack a bit. You'd
Well,
agree,
hang on. Can we frame this into a question?
Oh,
good.
thing.
Right.
You would agree with, well, would you agree with me that the two most essential constraints to development are bushfire? I don't say that. That's always been my number one, and two is flood liable land. You'd agree with that? Probably the top two to worry about, loss of life and the rest of it. I'm very concerned about some of the stuff in here, and I'll be making submissions. So would you expect, for example, that I'd be making submissions on flood liable land? That's another question. Would you expect that, do you think?
I don't think that's a question you can answer.
Just yes or no?
Well, you might be leading the witness.
No. I think you'd expect it, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
That's the answer, yes. Because I will be. I'm very concerned about one of those pieces of land, and I'm entitled to say that.
Oh yeah, I think that's the whole aim of putting the submissions in and then getting an answer.
Unbelievable.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrick. Question?
Yeah, no, just moving
Councillor Turland had foreshadowed that he was moving the recommendation.
Yes, and I'm going to move another motion, which is option 3.
You'll be moving an amendment?
Yes, an amendment to defer this until after the election. So it's not an election issue.
Councillor...
Well, that's a number of reasons. I'll speak to it.
Look,
I believe I have a second.
Excuse me, Councillor Scandrick, you know the rules of the chamber. You move an amendment to get a seconder, and then you have the right to speak to it.
Yes.
Do you have a seconder?
Councillor Halstead, I believe you were going to...
Councillor Scandrick, do not lead the...
No? Okay, fine.
Okay, do we have a seconder for a deferral until after the council election?
After the council election, but I would if it was changed to a deferral until after the completion of the
neighbourhood character statements.
local strategic planning strategy.
Yes, character statements. Yes, that's fine. We'll amend it to that.
Okay, so the motion is as presented. The amendment moved by Councillor Scandrick, seconded by Councillor Whipper, that the matter stand deferred until...
the completion, till after the completion
LSPS.
of local strategic planning strategy.
Until after the strategic planning strategy. Statement, sorry. Okay, so that is you're virtually in debate before Mr. Park leaves. Well, no, just stay there for a minute, because I think you, and just so the community are aware, this came to council prior to Christmas, the last meeting of Christmas, prior to Christmas, and Mr. Park had given up weeks and weeks and weeks because the resolution of council requested that it come to council before the end of the year. and he did the task that was asked. And then, to the abject disappointment I would expect, council deferred the decision until we had a full briefing in relation to that report, which I think was glad that Mr Park had about 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get over that. But you have presented something, a great document, and go out on exhibition, and well done for what you've done.
Mr Mayor, procedural question. Can I ask a procedural?
Okay, you can ask one last question.
Yeah, procedural question. My understanding is that the department needs to receive this before by a certain time frame. Is that correct?
Thank you, and through the chair, not the housing strategy, no. So the local strategic planning statement needs to be effective by the 1st of July.
So
But the housing strategy is a separate document, and albeit the outcomes of the housing strategy are being reflected in the draft LSPS that's also on the agenda tonight, the housing strategy itself does not need to go back to the department by the 1st of July.
But the other one does.
Thank you. So, Councillor Turland, you have moved the recommendation. So, and it's going to be seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Turland.
Okay. Go to page 69. You can see Wesleydale. You can see how big the property is, and you can see the pink, which is the subject land for possibility. Very small. And that's without going through the whole process of every other government department, Rural Fire Service, Sydney, New South Wales Water, and so on and so on. And also the Heritage Council in relation to Wesleydale, the building itself, Councillor McLaughlin, the old building. All that has to be determined with vistas around the old building, the old shed, which I know very well as well. I spent a few nights out there in that shed as well. But anyway, and with Robertson, you go to the same thing. Look at the page 65. It's not a lot of land, but what it does, it allows those two little villages to grow a little bit over a longer period of time. And they still haven't got through the process yet. This is just allocating the potential of those two lots. Now, we seem to have only brought up 2 lots that seem to be an issue here. The good thing is that the community can have a say. This is just a bit of a plan that might go there. It's never going to look like neither Robertson nor Wesleydale. It's never going to look like Wilton, 15,000 homes. You're looking at the one at Wesleydale, there's probably less than 300, maybe 400 homes, depending on the restrictions of the Rural Fire Service, Sydney Water, and everything else that will go through the process. But it's putting it out to the public, and I encourage the public to have their say. This is the first public statement that Mr White sat here and has made a comment on, which is great, and I'm sure the whole area, right through the whole Shire, will all have their say. To put both documents at once is perfect, because actually they can have a look at both of them and read in conjunction with each other and take it through the next step. So you're actually getting people that are going to be interested. When we put these documents out on public exhibition and other ones, we probably get 10, 15. I'm hoping, get hundreds of people to apply. Come tell us what you want. We're just putting it out there in the marketplace for you to have your say. But we should, if we put both out, we've got more chance of getting more people interested in having a say. It's a perfect timing to bring it through the process. And we gave the council a notion. We wanted it back here and approved by July in some form. It's 8 weeks for the community to have this say. Perfect timing. And we've already, the good thing is they've already shown interest in one area, and I would hope to think all your comrades out at Robertson will do the same and bring their points of view as well. Because some people will want it and some people won't. It's the same old issue. But unless we hear from them, don't talk after the event. And the next step here is that each one of these potential lots have to go through a lot longer work to get even to be built. It's a 30 to 40 year strategy plan which gives the tick from the state government so they don't come and overrule us like they did in Comungie Chelsea Gardens. We don't want to lose control of it again. Not that I'm saying it's a bad development, but we don't want to lose control like we nearly did before. And I hope everybody in the Shire has a voice, because some people are going to want it and some people don't. It's never going to look like Wilton.
Thank you, Councillor Turland. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thanks. Look, this should have been on exhibition before Christmas. We should be doing our workshops and listening to the community right now. and the sooner we get it done, the better. Now, councillors had a workshop on this, and we were shown how that the land was identified. We had layer upon layer upon layer, eliminating certain areas within the Shire to get where we are today. And that was the result of the staff. And you were right, Mr Mayor. We instructed the staff to have it done before Christmas, but with a little bit of smoke and mirrors, it got deferred. Well, here we are again, we want it deferred again. Well, no way. This has got to go out in exhibition, and I'm sure that the people at Cola Vale, you know, they've got Mr White there, he'll lead the charge for them, and he's already given out a number of specific items as to why it should possibly not go ahead. Now, the department want to see this happen. The department want to see the community input, because if we don't have the community input and we don't have a council decision on this, the department will come over the top and build it for them out at Wesleydale, and like they did here at Mossvale. You know, so that's what you're up against. So, as Councillor Turland said, community support, go to the workshops, make your submission, let the councillors know. You know, we can do two things at once, Mr Mayor. We can have the next item out, and we can approve this and have it out on exhibition as well. So, come on, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson, and go the males so we can do two things at once. Councillor, can you put that on a light out? Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I second this, Mr Mayor, because, you know, I think it's the right thing to do. We need to get it out there, as been stated, and as Mr Parks alluded to, that there is a time limit to get certain things out there, and he also alluded to that we are that little arm of state government that's got to provide, but this way we provide that housing with a background from the community. So preserving, hopefully, councillors, the villages, the towns, how we see it, rather than the department stepping in and just going, boom, sorry, you've got to supply so many houses, and then it's done and dusted. So there will be, as Councillor Turland rightly said, there will be those people that are opposed to, you know, don't change my town, don't infill here, or don't have greenfield sites here, or you've got to keep the green between. All those have got to be taken into context. This is over, as Mr Parks says, 30 to 40 years, so it's a long-term thing. But isn't it good to think that we're planning with, you know, our strategic planners are doing what the name says, strategically looking to where the area does grow. And we know we will have growth in the Shire. We will have more people moving down here, especially when we see what's happening at Wilton with an airport, with all that infrastructure. People are going to want to still escape and live in our beautiful Shire, I think. We've got to still keep it beautiful. And as Councillor Whipper would say, we don't want to, you know, kill the golden goose, do we? We've got to keep the character of the Southern Highlands. And I think we've got very good staff. They've done a great job on this. Well done to them all again, because I think they've worked very hard on this. And they're going to have to work hard getting it out. And as Councillor Nelson said, running these sessions to hear from the community and to see where we go. It's a long way down the track, but at least we've started. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, yeah, we do have to get it out there, but what we have to get out there, councillors, is our draft local strategic planning statement. We heard that from our own staff. There's no imperative or a deadline for the 1st of July to start giving expectations to developers and land speculators that we're going to develop their land. What we want to do... that wasn't staged.
Put a bit of cold water on it.
I'm not going to eat into my time. What we want to do is ensure that the local community do have a say. The way it's perceived at the moment is that we're dictating you know, where we'll have these developments rather than listening to the community. Now we know, we've been around long enough to know that once we flag an area for development, the expectation's set. And developers, they can be quite persuasive, and we don't want to set up those false expectations for developers or land speculators or the community, or put that fear in the community. I've been around long enough to know what the reaction was from the community of Colo Vale the last time Colo Vale was mentioned. It was overwhelming, and I'm sure that will be, sort of the same, maybe an increased response this time around. Now, with Robertson, I've been around long enough to know as well that there's, and I'm told there's nothing written, but there was, in my mind, very definitely, when we've done inspections over the years, a clear expectation that there were boundaries around the village of Robertson, apart from a couple of anomalies, and I don't know how they got through over the years. He lives in one of those anomalies, but where, the village, it was bounded by east, north, south and west street. That's Robertson. That's the village of Robertson, the Hoddle plan. So I think, councillors, I'm still confused because I've been asking consistently why this hasn't gone out before the housing strategy. Now, if there's been no imperative for the housing strategy to go out before the 1st of July, why hasn't this, the local planning statements, come before us so that we could put that out on an exhibition? Don't blame us, the councillors, for wanting or being seen to delay this, because this could have come out 3 months ago, standalone, without the confusion of the housing strategy being hitched to it. What it speaks to me, councillors and community, and I'll be saying this to the community as well, that we're dictating where we think development should go. It contradicts everything that we're being told in the local planning statements. So, councillors, the important thing is to hear what our community want, and I think those of us around this table know exactly what our community want. It's written in our 2030 statements and our 2030 plans. It's there already. So, why would we do this, councillors? Let's make informed decisions based on the voice of the community around where they want to see growth, and let's act accordingly with those wishes, rather than setting expectations up for, as I said, developers and speculators.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Okay, in the earlier debate on this a couple of meetings ago, I supported the deferral because I had questions and concerns. Councillors were subsequently went through a briefing session on the matter, and I have to say I was much more comfortable with the document as it stood. So, I do have my own views. I live out at Robertson. I first lived at Robertson, I think it was 40 odd years ago. And I look at Robertson now, I've returned, and many of the houses there now were not there 40 years ago. So Robertson has changed. This society, this community, we have changed requirements. We have more people, we need more diversity, we need housing for people who are socially disadvantaged and people who are growing a little older. We have to meet those, so we do need a strategy and we do need a way forward. Having read this document in more detail now, I guess I appreciate that it is evidence-based, and I think we need to get the community's comment on this. Warts and all, and that's not a pun on my own name, we need to hear from the community what they think of the Wesley Vale, Robertson, Barrel, Moss Vale, Mittagong. I want to hear what they want to say. I would hate to remove any component from it, from the discussion. I want as wide a discussion as possible. We've got 2 months, so I want the community to come back as fierce, robust in debate as they wish and tell us what they want. It's not for me to say I don't want development in Robertson just because I live there. That's conflict of interest. I shouldn't do that. So I want to hear from the community before I make my decision on this, and we must recognise change is happening. We can't do a Trump and build a wall around the Southern Highlands and say, no more people. We're having children. People are growing older. People want to live here. We're the lucky ones. We live in the great Shire and we want to keep it with the same flavour and taste, but we can't deny other people the same right. We simply can't do it. It's unethical, and we came here at some stage. 250 years ago, this was not our land. We came here, lived here, to the disgust of the locals, the Aboriginal people. I mean, what we did was terrible. We have to just keep in mind that we don't own this land. We are looking after it. We're custodians of the land. So we have to do the best we can for the future and future generations. If we take a selfish view today, we are cutting off our future generations and future people around Australia. So we have to take the bigger point. We're only here for 50, 100 years, depending how if you're vegan or not.
You live longer there.
Maybe. So we have to look after this place as well as we can, but we have to cope with the future. We cannot ignore the future. We can't build a wall around it physically or in time. So I want this to go out to public exhibition now. I want as long as this possible to discuss this and hear what the people say, because it's the community that's going to speak, not individual councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mark Wharton. I would suggest that you nearly got gonged for the first time in 4 years. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm not recommending razor wire at the Shire boundaries or anything else, but there will be people wanting to come here. It is a constant thing. You only have to look at the LSPS that we're going to consider shortly, and it talks about 2036. 38% couple-only households, 22% children's couples with children, 28% single people households, 8% lone person. It's quite clear we're building lots of houses. That's what this is about. 50-60% of our housing strategy is going to be about greenfield sites. And I'm already getting strong pushback. There's the Collarvale pushback. I've seen that brochure everywhere, because they've been through this before. They're saying no, 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 and they're saying we don't want to double the size of our village. Double the size of our village. And Chris White put up a very good discussion there, and he zeroed in on a couple of things there which are rapidly changing, and bushfires is one of those. I won't even talk about the green between, the character of the statement of the area and so on. Councillor Whipper already has. I totally agree with him. We must do the LSPS first. We must have those character statements locked down, the consultation with the people, in consultation with this and 2031, the guiding documents. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That photography exhibition that the competition that the staff ran, looking for what you like about the Highlands, overwhelmingly, it's the character of our area, the bush and the conservation areas and all of that, the Crown area. So why are we rushing ahead with this? Yes, that one, 1st of July, totally happy with that. Let's go, let's have those consultations. Guess what? That is going to give us a big amount of noise back on the actual housing strategy. But looking at some of those things, Robertson, there's a variety of issues out there, and we've got to get through them. I attended a workshop out there recently, and it was very interesting with the range of people there. Darrabee, amenity, noise, traffic, density, and of course expansion into the green between, which we've all said we're going to contain the houses, and here we are doing it again. East Barrel, same thing, expanding the town. In fact, it's morphing together with East Barrel and on its way out towards Bong Bong. Look, I don't think we've worked out what we're doing in town, Mr. Mayor, let alone these greenfield sites, and I think the first thing that's got to be done is this. And rather than make it, which it will invariably become, an election issue, I don't want to see that. No, I've been quite clear about it, Mr. Nelson, Councillor Nelson. I'm saying defer it so it isn't. Now, that's been amended tonight with, okay, we'll just get through that approval of the LSPS, fine. But that is what you risk with this. You risk it becoming... I was looking at Councillor Nelson. It reminds me of... Yes, Minister, sometimes I must say that, but yeah. We must go and have that consultation, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right. So that tonight, who moved to Councillor Turlin and McLaughlin? It is probably one of the most important documents that this council is going to put out. But a little bit of history, it was council that requested this document be done within a prescribed time. And the prescribed time was for a reason, and that was we were getting a whole listings of spot rezonings coming before council, and the comment was we will put a moratorium on any spot rezonings until we get the strategy out on exhibition. So it was us as a council who requested that in relation to this document. That was 3 months ago that it came to council. So it is, I think it was, from memory, it was about last July that it came, that we asked for this to be presented. So staff have done what council have requested. It was deferred at Christmas, whether that be a good thing or a bad thing. But by the sounds of it, most councils feel more at ease having a presentation from council staff. The comment that we don't listen to, may not listen to council, the wider community, Wesleydale came to council back in about 2006 when it went through all the processes and council refused it. The community didn't want it at the time either. Gibbergunya, which is not on this list at the moment, in there behind part of Mittagong up Presley Street End, was also identified. There was large community outrage at that, and that was put aside. So council, it is not a foregone conclusion. Councillor Turlin's right. It can be read in conjunction with another document. And again, unless we supply the land and make some form of comment to the state government, Councillor McLaughlin's right. They'll just come in and say, well, you're going to do Wesleydale. Instead of putting 500 blocks on it, we'll give them 800. So we want to be in charge of our destiny. And all councils are right, and I've heard it from everyone, to try and get that balance between what attracts people here and to keep that, to keep the broad acreage look as opposed to the shires further north, which allowed 5 acre subdivisions and spoilt the whole place. We've got to do that balancing act. So there is plenty of time for comment from the community. Council does listen, but there will be decisions made that may not, as been pointed out, may not make that section of a particular area happy, but we will have to acknowledge the fact we've got to supply land, keep it in us in charge of it. Councillor McLaughlin, your right of reply. Councillor Turlin.
Yeah, I seem to be locking around only two places now, Collavale and Rubbo. But anyway, Collavale is one story where it doesn't have to be, it could be large lot subdivision. It could be 1 acre, could be 2 acre, could be 5 acre. Who would know? That's not where we're at the moment. The first thing is to ask in the community, see if they're interested in that proposal. We have to spread the weight over the whole Shire, not just in one little corner. If we don't do something in the northern villages, there is nothing else in this sheet that allows anything further. So we're spreading it over the whole Shire, which is great. It's the only way to go. I think if we don't, we're getting planning proposals in left, right and centre, and making the poor old staff run around, and then some going to the Minister for approval over the top of us. This is controlling the process. As I said before, it's great to see the people here tonight, and I hope that these and others will make a submission on both policies back to us in 8 weeks. I said, I don't think it's perfect they're both out at the same time. If the people are interested in one, they'll make a statement. Now they've got 2 to make a statement in. That's even better than 1. Because if you drag them over another longer period, one won't have the input from the public as they both will, because they'll be both interested in making submissions. So 8 weeks, it shouldn't be a political argument in the next council election in September. If that is made, well...
Councillor Scandrett.
Well, we'll see what happens and who's actually standing then, but at this point in time I would think that it's not the right reason why it should be brought into the arena. We've asked staff, they've done what we've asked. We're putting it out to the community. And it's just, as I said, the community here is earlier, making comment before it's even gone out. This is just at the draft stage, so I'm sure we'll have lots of input in 8 weeks' time, and then we can make a decision of which way we go, listening to the community.
Thank you, Councillor Turland. So we have the recommendation.
Just before you put it, in number 4 there, You better change the word constraints to constraints, put a T in there. Everyone will know what it's talking about.
Yeah.
Yep. Good on you, Councillor Halstead. With that small alteration, I'll put the recommend. So is there any comment behind? Sorry. The amendment as moved by Councillors Scandrett and Whipper. Put that. All in favour. Councillors Halstead, Whipper and Scandrett. Those against. Councillors Andrews, Nelson, Turland, McLaughlin and Markwart and Gare. I declare the amendment lost. Thank you. So we now can move on. We'll put the motion again. All in favour? Same way. No, Councillor Halstead has voted for. Whipper and Scandrett have voted against. Okay. We move on to the 12.6, page 141.
Page 141.
Draft Wingecarribee Local Strategic Planning Statement. Now that's created a bit of debate. Do you wish a introduction or put it? Move Councillors Andrews and Nelson. Any discussion? Put it. All in favour? Carried. Can I have show of hands on that, please? It's unanimous. Now we move on to 147, Biannual Delivery Program 2017-21 Progress Report, 1st of July, 31 December 2019. Councillor Turland, are you moving?
I'll move it, but I've still got a question which I asked last time.
And a seconder?
I'll second it.
Councillor Scandrett. Okay. Questions?
As I asked last time, page 153, and it relates to GIPA and information requirements. Does council follow its process in all requests on GIPA information or training and quality purposes?
Who's it directed to?
Well, does council follow its own process?
Ms. Lidgard?
We follow very clear guidelines around GIPA applications received to council, if that's your question.
The question is, does council follow its own GIPA and quality processes in? So if council wants some information, do they go through the GIPA process or not?
We aren't required to GIPA our own information. If we want information from other organisations, then we would put in a GIPA. We do that. But we can access our own information in our own corporate records.
And so that information is not played to third parties? Or
I'm not answering that question.
You can stick to your first question, but the second question is not a question that Ms. Lidgard will answer, nor will I.
Well, you will.
Councillor Turland, I take that as a threat.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
I've asked questions with notice and I've had no answers coming back at all. Been knocked back all the time.
Yes, well, please be aware how you frame your comment. Councillor Scandrett.
As I flagged at the beginning of the meeting and also in the last meeting, Mr Mayor, I sought clarification in relation to this report that we in fact had inspected the Playhouse in December 2018 as part of our asset management program, and I didn't get an answer. Now, the staff have said that they did.
So the question...
Councillor, which objective are you referring to?
Council's property activities, Madam GM.
Which number?
DP 10 would be the most relevant, I would think, and that is, are we consistently inspecting buildings? Because we were advised you had inspected that, which was in the year prior to closing it. We took bookings all
It was inspected, we had concerns, investigations were undertaken, and when the information was available, we acted accordingly.
And it was only brought to council at that time when we took bookings and ran activities such as Women in Black.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor McLaughlin.
It's probably a little bit of a Dorothy Dix here, but I think for the public here, page 158, I think it's DP04 and DP05, development and maintain and engage a safe workforce.
Sorry,
What page?
Your numbers and your page don't match.
Don't they?
What page?
Page 154.
50. You said
Sorry.
58.
Oh, I beg your pardon. 154, DP04 and DP05, with regard to the COVID-19 virus, just you might like to give us a bit of an idea that it's in hand, Madam GM.
Council, we have always had a business continuity plan. We have a sub-plan for pandemics. We are reviewing those and updating them rapidly, and we are ready to put all necessary measures in place as and when they become necessary to implement. I would just make the point that it is not our position to talk about community safety. That information is issued by New South Wales Health Department.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Ward.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to page 153, DP01, Develop and Implement an Elected Member Professional Development Program. A question for staff. I'm just wondering if you can give some information upon the date of when there will be briefing or forums to potential candidates for the next council term, so they can be prepared to put aside time or whatever. Thank you.
Just to clarify, DP01 is actually about professional development for councillors when they're elected. But to answer your question, I'll ask Ms Lidgard because she's preparing the programme.
Yes, we are in the process of finalising a program of information sessions for potential candidates. They are looking at starting at commencing in around May and then following through to June. So we've got a number of activities planned at this point.
Thank you. Any further comments? Then the recommendation as moved by Councillor Turl and second by Councillor Scandrett. Put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. 13.1, exclusion of notice of motion and question with notice from business paper. Moved recommendation, Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Markwart. Any discussion? Councillor Scandrett.
Well, Mr Mayor, open and transparent society, I know the answer from the GM will be this is how the meeting rules are, but guess what? We're going to be reviewing those meeting rules. The GM told us in a briefing last week that we'll be addressing that on the 25th of March.
So, question?
I'd actually like to clarify for Councillor Scandrett what I said about the meeting on the 25th of March was about introducing a code which will rule over councillor information sessions.
Yes,
it has nothing to do with the code of meeting practice, which is actually adopted following the model code issued by the Office of Local Government.
Well, thank you, GM, for jumping in. I didn't know you were a mind reader, but you obviously are. No, seriously, I know exactly what was said the other day, and that is you're going to close our briefing sessions, which aren't in public forum, they don't have a minute taker, they're not advertised, they don't have an agenda, everything else, and say they're all confidential. Everyone can come in and so on, but you can't talk about it to the people who elected you. And that's sort of where I'm going with this, because the motion that I put up and a general business question, Mr Mayor, were very straightforward. One of them was why the Mayor shouldn't... I'm in debate.
You're not in debate, Councillor.
We have a mover.
Well, I do have to object. This is an exclusion report. It does not allow the councillor who put in a question to reintroduce it into the chamber. It is not allowed.
If the motion is to note it, I'm debating that.
No.
No, there we go. Big brother again. Okay, big sister,
No,
sorry.
no,
No, truly, there's a motion which is quite a reasonable one, and I can't even talk about it. That's what
That's
I'm saying.
correct. Well, I
can't
didn't know
even
that
say
was what...
who it was about.
Councillor Scandrett,
I can't even do that.
if you do not resume your seat, I'll ask you to move outside and you can sit down out
Ask me to
there.
resume my seat.
I'll ask you to resume your seat,
Okay.
but you will not listen.
Oh, no, I listen. I'm just making a point, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
Look, what I'm trying to find out, I've had 3 removed. You've had 3. You've had 2. And this doesn't tell us which one's what where. All we've got is the same statement. It should at least inform us of who this relates to.
Well,
I think
look,
this
Councillor
is ambiguous to just hide it under the table. We can't talk about, we can't ask questions, we can't do anything. It's not, there's nothing here. Who do we know who wrote what?
Councillor Turlin, can I assure you...
Look, I believe the councillor has put the notice or question to the reporter. I've ruled that the matter is not submittable to the council.
Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Scandrett, I will ask you to leave the chamber.
Well, it'll be either Councillor Scandrett leaves,
Councillor
or
Scandrett.
the staff will leave, because there's enough, this is enough. We will not...
Councillor Scandrett, it's too late. You've gone the extra yard. Either you leave or the staff leave.
Yes, exactly right, Councillor Houston. Don't point at me, Mr Mayor.
I'm not pointing at you.
I haven't given anything to the reporter. I took it back.
What you intended to.
Councillor Scandrett, and I'll put all councillors on notice. One more, and I'll close the meeting down again, and you can answer to the community.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Point of order. You have asked the council to leave. He has refused.
No, I haven't said a thing.
Yeah. He has not left the chamber. Thank you. I'm just trying to clarify.
Need to point that out.
Is your directive...
Councillor Scandrett,
You asked me.
I have asked that you leave the chamber for 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes?
Yes.
No, I'm going to...
I am asking you to leave the chamber for 5 minutes.
Mr Mayor, I'm not going to...
Councillor Scandrett, are you going to be a disorderly conduct, or will you leave the chamber?
It's election time, everyone. Anyway, go your hardest, Mr Mayor. I'm elected and representing.
Would I have moved that the meeting be closed?
No.
You can't do
No,
that.
no, it should be suspended for, just suspended, and then we can,
All right.
you can deal with Councillor Scandrett. Yes. But I'd just like to make the point, Mr Mayor, it says here in bold print, one submitted notice of motion and one submitted question with notice were excluded in accordance with clause 320 above. So they don't comply, that's why they're excluded.
Thank you. I declare the meeting suspended for 1/4 hour.
This continues, all staff are going to...